Chapter 215. Once upon a time, Kadia felt that his family's future goal was very clear, and that was to have a house full of children and grandchildren. The Akat family was a family with a rare bloodline. In the past 1,000 years, the members of the family rarely prospered. Usually, only one person would carry on the family line, which was quite rare among the nobles. Kadia's father, Bran, had once told him about the characteristics of the Akat family. They were good at fighting but not good at fighting in groups, because the Akat family didn't have groups. They could only fight in groups alone. When Bran said this, he had a helpless expression on his face. He looked at Kadia with high hopes, but unfortunately, Kadia was defeated in the end. According to the family tradition, Kadia gave birth to an only child. After discovering that Luoya's talent was mediocre when he was young, Kadia's thoughts became much clearer. Being an ordinary person wasn't a bad thing for the Akat family to some extent. After all, the most important task in the life of an ordinary noble was to give birth. Without extraordinary powers, they wouldn't have too many duties and responsibilities. They would be fine if they stayed in the territory and didn't wander around, so naturally, they would have more opportunities to reproduce. In fact, in the Akat family's 1,000 years of history, the heads of the Akat family who prospered were always mediocre in terms of extraordinary power. One reason was that there were many births, and the other reason was that there were many receptacles. If they weren't very capable, they would usually marry the daughter of a count who was of equal status. Generally speaking, the first wife of such a status wouldn't be able to stop the marquis from taking in concubines. Therefore, the heads of the Akat family during these times were rare to have many wives and concubines, and many children and grandchildren. Of course, after a few generations, they would usually fall into a population crisis. The wives would return to the powerful family, and the husband and wife would both be extraordinary, so their fertility rate was basically the lowest among all couples. Kadia was familiar with the family's history, so he was very clear about the morality of the ancestors in this aspect. But it had to be said that even though Kadia had traveled extensively, he still panicked and had a headache when he saw the girls around Luoya every day. The princess of the Saint Maester theocracy, the successor to the president of the Rose Business Union, and the eldest daughter of the Akate family. When these few people gathered together, it would easily become a regional or even international news. Perhaps it was due to the short lifespan of the Akate family's awakened. But no matter if it was Nua Iyer, Ai Lizi, or Xia Luot, they all had a special concern for Luoya, and their desire to protect her was extremely high. Under the driving force of love, the strength of these girls soared like a rocket. In the past, it would be considered good to find one Nua Iyer in the entire human world. But now there were 3 of them. Moreover, these 3 girls obviously had no intention of giving up. 2 days ago, they even fought over Luoya. If he really only chose one in the future, would the other 2 be willing to let it go? For example, Ai Lizi, in order to increase her strength, she practiced almost masochistically. Her lifelong wish was to marry Luoya and have a baby with him. When the time came, if Luoya chose someone else, would she be able to give her blessings as a sister? This kind of rejection of the meaning of life, the blow of being abandoned, Kadia felt that it was normal for love to turn into hate. The murder of love was like a knife, floating in Kadia's heart every day. He felt that he had to remind Luoya. Luoya, do you still remember what I told you to find more women? Yes, I remember. I take back those words. From now on you have to remember one thing. Never provoke girls again. After thinking for a long time, the Marquis looked at the youth in front of him, and said this sincerely. Hearing this, Luoya's face turned blank. The youth blinked. He didn't understand why his father, who was happy that he had advanced to level 4 of source rank, would suddenly mention this. However, with this request it wasn't a big deal. As expected, his father, who had yet to remarry, still advocated monogamy. Luoya looked at the single man in front of him, and sighed in his heart. Kadia's deep feelings were rarely seen in noble families. This was something that Luoya deeply felt. From this point of view, Luoya wasn't surprised that Kadia had changed his mind. Father, don't worry. I understand. Yes, it's good that you understand. I was afraid that you would be impulsive. I will learn from you and only marry one. Yes, that's HM. Hearing Luoya's reply, the Marquis' eyes widened. After a long time, he pointed at the youth and trembled in anger, unable to speak. You still understand? What the hell do you understand? Kadia complained in his heart. On the other side, the black-haired youth looked at his agitated father and nodded with a smile. As expected, I guessed correctly. Sai, look at how happy my father is. He's trembling in excitement. Luoya felt good about having a filial son. Kadia became even angrier when he saw this. He didn't dare to say anything more, and could only clear up the misunderstanding between Luoya and himself. What I meant was that you shouldn't learn from me. What's wrong with marrying more? It's good to marry more. What I really meant was that in less than a year's time, you will be going to the academy. At that time, there will be more and more young people, and there will be more temptations. You must control yourself. Those who get close to you might not necessarily be good to you. They might be opportunists who covet our family. Kadia's words were quite serious. In fact, he had encountered such situations when he was young. He had even heard of successful cases of scheming women. If Luoya couldn't resist the temptation and married such a woman, then the Akat family would probably explode in a physical sense. Ai Lizzie didn't need to be mentioned. Luo Chet was right next to her, and the journey to the holy capital was about the same. He would probably be robbed and killed before he could even enter the Akat family. Kadia's mind was filled with scenes of chaos and war. Luoya was stunned for a moment before he held his chin and fell into deep thought. Indeed, although the girls that Luoya met before this were extremely intelligent, they were all very pure. Moreover, their family backgrounds were the best in the Shia family. There was no reason for them to covet the Akat family. However, after entering the academy, things would be different. Sometimes green tea girls didn't care about age. It was even an instinct. Luoya didn't have much experience in the field of relationships. Chapter 216. Sharon Forest. This was a place Luoya was both familiar and unfamiliar with. Ever since he was a child, Luoya had heard of a terrifying forest in the south called Sharon Forest. There were countless monsters and cruel werewolves hidden within. If one didn't obey, they would be captured by the werewolves of Sharon Forest. That's right, this was a popular story in the Akate territory, or rather, in the entire southern part of the Saint Mestre Empire. In this story, werewolves were murderers who ran around everywhere, hiding in the dark corners, waiting to catch students. Children who heard this story for the first time would be scared to the point of crying. Of course, after Luoya recalled the memories of his past life, this kind of story no longer scared him. After growing up and doing some research, Luoya discovered that there were many strange and bizarre stories in Sharon Forest. There were several records of legends written based on these rumors in the Akat family. Under the influence of such large-scale rumors, Sharon Forest gradually became a synonym for terror among the people of various countries. It became a place where people rarely went. Those who went there were mostly explorers, and some of them had some mental issues. After all, anyone with a normal brain would go to ruins where there was a chance of getting rich overnight, and not go to the forest to call the werewolves brothers. Luoya actually knew the reason why these people were attracted. It was one of the legends that said that there was a huge secret hidden in the depths of Sharon Forest. In the past, Luoya didn't care about it, but after hearing Isha Bela's words, Luoya felt that it might have something to do with the activities of the Sage of Dusk. Treants, this was an ancient race that was almost extinct. Their lifespan was generally very long, and as long as they had the right conditions, it wouldn't be a problem for them to live for thousands of years. At least in the legends, these Treants gave people the feeling that they were very mysterious. However, Isha Bela's words were a little different. Drunkard Treants, what kind of strange species were they? Luoya's head was full of question marks as he thought about the name, but it was the only clue he had at the moment. The other necessary item was Kanti from the ancient Austin Empire. Luoya, who was not that interested in alcohol, was also unfamiliar with this wine. This time, when Kadia came, Luoya originally wanted to report the situation of the Akat family to him, but when he heard that his father would return to the eastern region in 2 days, Luoya, who had a lot to say, became silent. He didn't want to cause trouble for his family. He didn't want his family to worry about him. This is the reason why many people don't tell their family about their difficulties. And now that Kadia is about to return to the border, Roja didn't want him to worry too much. After thinking about it, Roja could only ask about Kadia's understanding of the Sage of Twilight and the 6 disasters. I haven't heard of this before. Is it recorded in an ancient book? Looking at his father, who obviously didn't know anything, Luoya hesitated for a moment, then smiled and attributed this to the random talk he read at home. While the two were chatting, Xiao Luot heard the news and rushed over. The 3 of them had lunch together. During the lunch, the atmosphere was quite harmonious. Kadia even said a few good words for Xiao Luot, and asked Luoya to communicate more with Xiao Luot about the territory, which made the red-haired girl very touched. Uncle Kadia, don't worry, the development of the Akat territory will be left to me and Luoya. Grabbing Luoya's hand, Xiao Luot patted his chest excitedly as if he was giving a military order. He looked more enthusiastic than Luoya himself, but in fact it was true. Xiao Luot didn't have any cards in his hand now. He was counting on the development of the Akat territory to prove his importance. Besides, although there weren't many officials and people in the territory, they still had some say. When they overwhelmingly supported the union between Xiao Luot and Luoya, Kadia, as the lord, had to consider the interests of the territory and his family. To sum it up, Xiao Luot wanted to keep Luoya as his mistress, the kind of mistress with the whole territory. Kadia knew the reason for Xiao Luot's behavior. He had already promised not to interfere, so he chose to acquiesce. At the same time, he glanced at Luoya, who didn't have any self-awareness at all, and sighed in his heart. It's really strange. Is there a special attack against girls? Kadia didn't understand Luoya's routine, but he was sure that at least for the time being, everything was stable. Luoya, who had recovered from her injury, originally planned to leave with Kadia, but Xiao Luot asked her to stay on the grounds of rehabilitation. Going back with Kadia was equivalent to going to see Ai Lizi. For Xiao Luot, who had experienced this before, it was simply sending a sheep to the tiger's mouth. At least in Rose, Miss Luoya was unwilling to let go. After sending Kadia away, Luoya asked Xiao Luot for the information collected during this period of time, and began to study it seriously. It had to be said that as a commercial organization, Sorofia's intelligence network was the most developed in the human world. Before Luoya and Xiao Luot returned, the work of collecting clues had already begun. Now that the first piece of information had been sorted out, it naturally included the details of the so-called Conti wine. Luoya had never heard of Conti wine. In fact, no one else in the current Shia had ever heard of it. The reason was very simple. It was because the name of this wine had changed. The person who came up with the name of this wine was Isabela. She was an ancient person who lived hundreds of years ago. In that era, the common language of the people was still the ancient Austin language from the Second Era. It was a language that was more complicated than the modern language, and there were certain differences in pronunciation. The Conti wine mentioned by Isabela was gradually narrowed down to Cade wine in the Austin Empire. Cade wine, this was a kind of wine that was almost lost in the Austin Empire. But what surprised Luoya was that the reason it was lost was not because of the difficulty of brewing, but because of the taste. To put it simply, this wine was too disgusting. Wait, this is a mushroom wine? Mushroom? Can this thing be used to brew wine? Looking at the intelligence investigator who came to report, even Luoya couldn't hide his surprise. Hearing his question, the middle-aged intelligence director smiled bitterly. In fact, when he saw this report, he also asked the same question. Yes, sir. In fact, our people personally investigated it. It is indeed an ancient wine with a long history of brewing. But isn't it a bit careless to just make an inference based on the age? That's true, but we found a lot of supporting evidence. Supporting evidence? The black-haired boy looked up at the middle-aged man. The intelligence director and Luoya looked at each other and nodded solemnly. A few hundred years ago, the villages near Sharon Forest had received many large orders for Cade wine. Chapter 217. Since ancient times, archaeology had always been a highly demanding task. In Luoya's previous world, when an ancient antique was unearthed, the experts would often argue endlessly about what it was used for. In Xiya, although people lived longer, investigating an object from hundreds of years ago was not an easy task. According to legend, Cade wine was a local wine produced in the border forest of the ancient Austin Empire in the Second Era. Its birth brought with it an indescribable taste. Generally speaking, ordinary people would not use mushrooms to make wine, especially the mushrooms called shants, which were used to make Cade wine. They were colorful and beautiful, and the common reaction after eating them was slight dizziness. Yes, this mushroom was slightly poisonous, and the ancient people who used it to make wine were not stupid, but poor. The ancient Austinian Empire was vast, and although it was generally considered the golden age of human development, the living standards of the people in the remote mountainous areas were still very poor. They did not have good land like the Great Plains, and the limited amount of food they had was mostly for consumption. Brewing wine with grain was too extravagant for the mountain people. However, as the saying went, snakes have their own ways, rats have their own ways. Although food was not good, other things in the mountains could be used. After a long time of exploration, people found that this kind of slightly poisonous mushroom wine was the most cost-effective choice. After all, it could not be eaten otherwise. Although it was not very tasty after being made into wine, the toxins were broken down. It was a pure recycling of waste. As the saying goes, freeloading is a form of happiness, especially when this kind of freeloading is based on recycling waste. It is double the happiness. Because of this, Cade wine was widely spread in the mountains of the ancient Austin Empire. After humans arrived in the New World in the Third Era, the conditions of the undeveloped mountains allowed the production of this wine to spread on a large scale. However, as the saying went, everything in the world can't escape the law of survival of the fittest. Cade wine was famous for its low cost and easy production in the era, when everyone was in trouble. However, as the human world gradually stabilized and the wasteland was turned into farmland, the continuous harvests improved people's living standards rapidly, and Cade wine gradually began to show its weakness. That was, it tasted terrible. Xiya's native mushroom wine had a somewhat unique taste, and the fragrance was different from that of traditional grain wine. After having surplus food, people chose to pursue a happy life, and naturally no longer went into the mountains to dig for mushrooms to make wine. Yes, there is no large-scale winemaking anymore. Only the mountain people may make some in their own homes. However, there is a village called Baudry at the edge of Sharon Forest that once produced this wine on a large scale hundreds of years ago. There are even ruins of the winery there. I have to say that Roja was quite lucky. Normally, this kind of winery would be forgotten in history. But fortunately, Padre Town was located in a remote mountainous area, and the whole town was poor. The stone building invested by a foreigner was strong and durable. After the order was gone, the winery was abandoned, but no one was willing to tear it down. It was the mayor's office, the militia's arsenal, and now it's used as the church's warehouse. Because it had always been under official management, the process of changing hands was very clear. So Sorofia's investigation was relatively smooth. After many inquiries, the estimated time of production was about 350 years ago, which was around the same time that Luoya and the others found out about the disappearance of the Twilight Sage. And our local investigation team collected a rumor that this wine was once called the werewolf wine, or werewolf nectar. Werewolf nectar? Yes. The source of the rumor was that hunters would occasionally find containers of Cade wine in the mountains. They thought it might be because the werewolves of Sharon Forest liked this wine, and over time, it was called werewolf nectar. I see. Luoya's eyes widened when he thought of the name Drunkard Tree. He felt that he had guessed the truth of the rumor, and with the support of so much supporting evidence, Luoya had completely confirmed his path. First, he would go to Baudry, get the wine, and then head south into Sharon Forest with the information he gathered there. It was now spring, and although Luoya didn't know the life schedule of the tree species, according to common sense, plants should be active in spring, so there shouldn't be a problem with the timing. But how did the tree know that he had wine? Did he need to shout from the forest? Luoya was very confused about this problem. And how would the tree species taste this mushroom wine? After all, some species of mushrooms grew on trees. drinking wine made from the fungi on his body, if it was a human under the same conditions. Blurg. Luoya retched a few times when he thought of the scene. He hurriedly cut off the groundless thought, and began to think of more constructive problems, such as, how many people should he bring and how to get there? Although Luoya didn't believe the rumors of the werewolves in Sharon Forest, there must be a reason for their notoriety. As Sharon Forest was close to the land of chaos, it wasn't a peaceful place. In the past, there were many records of magical creatures descending from the mountains. Luoya didn't know how long it would take to find the tree species in the forest, so it naturally wouldn't be like a field trip. On the other hand, Sharon Forest was a notorious gathering place for heretics and cultists in Shia. Although these heretics wouldn't come out easily, it was entirely possible for some organization to establish a stronghold in Sharon Forest. Luoya's mission was to search the forest, so the chances of encountering some cultists were quite high. Cultists basically represented evil and evil. As a noble of the theocracy, Luoya couldn't avoid encountering them. Therefore, this trip had to focus on military strength. In this regard, Luoya currently had three options. The first option was naturally to deploy troops from Aukot territory. The advantage was that his troops were reliable and had a clear command system. The disadvantage was that it would take time and require Kadia's approval. The procedures were complicated, and it would be difficult to find a reason to deploy troops. Aukot's home wasn't connected to Sharon Forest, and he would have to pass through Lochase territory. He would also have to disguise himself and go to Austin to buy wine. Passing through two countries at once was very troublesome, and if Austin found out, it would be a big problem. After all, the relationship between the two countries was bad to begin with. If Luoya's identity was exposed, they would very likely be treated as invaders. After all, secretly marching troops in the territory of another country was a very stupid thing to do. The second option was Nuwa Ayer's delegation. As the princess of the theocracy, Nuwa Ayer was naturally escorted by guards. It had to be said that this was an elite team led by Archbishop Philip, whom Luoya had met once before. They were strong and had a small number of people, so they wouldn't be easily discovered. However, just like the advantages of this team, there were also disadvantages. The members of this team were too powerful for Luoya to command. Nuwa Ayer had said yesterday that she needed to return to the front lines as soon as possible, so she definitely wouldn't be able to travel with Luoya. The third option was to request assistance from Xia Luot. Luochai was bordered by Sharon Forest, and as a commercial country, there would be a large number of caravans entering and leaving the Austin Empire in the early spring after a long winter. It wouldn't be a problem to move covertly. However, in terms of guards, Luochai generally used pagan mercenaries. The loyalty of these people would be a problem. After all, in the face of life, sometimes money wasn't that important. It was the greatest tragedy to have money, but not have the life to spend it. After thinking for a while, Luoya eliminated the option of deploying troops from his territory. However, he was hesitant about the second and third options until Pei Tila's voice suddenly sounded. "Little guy, you haven't accepted my believers yet?" You have believers too? That's great. Where are they? Can you call them over? Where are they? Aren't they the nearby guards?" The Earth Mother asked in confusion under Luoya's shocked gaze. Chapter 218. The Guards in the Vicinity? When Luoya heard Pei Tila's question, his mind was a little confused. This was because Luoya's living environment had caused him to selectively filter out certain people, and the best example of this was the guards. The job of a guard could be said to be similar to maids. It was an indispensable job in every noble family. However, unlike the maids who had a strong presence, the guards could be said to be cautious and low-key. The guards of the Aukot family were all professionals. Many of them were experienced soldiers who had retired from the battlefield. These people had fewer words compared to the ordinary guards. They only paid attention to one thing, and that was whether there was any danger present. Luoya had long gotten used to this kind of stealth mode, so when he looked at the guards at the door, he couldn't hide the surprise in his heart. Looking at the steel guards, Luoya recalled a conversation with Xia Luot. He remembered that the guards of the Sorofia family were their long-term partners. They specialized in defense, and they had accompanied Xia Luo to the Akat family before. However, this team, like Gulacy, stayed there until the church released them recently. Personal guards hiring heretics was not a crime among nobles, so there wasn't a problem of not being able to hire them. After asking, Luoya found out that the origin substance used by the guards was Peitila's perseverance. Perseverance was an origin substance that belonged to the Earth Mother. In the years after Peitila's death, it was spread by the Earth Mother. However, as time passed, the successors of Peitila were buried in history one after another. Now only Peitila was left in the upper reaches of perseverance. I thought you already knew, and even came to me because of them. No, they are Xia Luo's men. Our meeting was purely fate. Luoya waved his hand and told the truth to the Earth Mother. He also asked Peitila if there were any buffs like protection. The answer he got was similar to the Gulen Daer. Peitila could even temporarily strengthen the defense of the believers through blessings, which could be said to have improved the defense of this heretic army. The black-haired young man was overjoyed and immediately decided to pull the Church of Perseverance to his side. But he had to admit that this matter was quite difficult and required at least 2 steps. First, Luoya naturally had to discuss with their old employer, Sorofia. Luoya needed Sorofia to be willing to transfer the contract. After that, he had to negotiate with the leader of the Church of Perseverance. To be honest, Luoya was a little nervous about this matter. After all, the mercenaries were considered a part of the National Defense Force. Even if it was just a transfer contract, it would be difficult because this matter wasn't something that Xia Luo could decide. Instead, it required the approval of the military. Without a doubt, this was a big matter that needed to be discussed with Kadia. For this reason, Luoya made a special trip. Luoya, didn't we just meet? If there's nothing urgent, I will rest for a while. Father, I found a strong heretic army without any risk and want to absorb them. Now that you mention this, I'm not sleepy anymore. Well, not bad. As the traditional lord of the Akate family, Kadia immediately became energetic when he heard about Luoya's situation. He immediately prepared to discuss with the Church of Perseverance and strive to come up with a result before leaving. As for Xia Luo's side, Luoya naturally came personally. But what the young man didn't expect was that the red-haired girl didn't feel embarrassed after hearing Luoya's words. Instead, she was happier than Luoya. I didn't expect Miss Peitila to be the god of the Church of Perseverance. This is great, Charlotte said as she walked closer. She reached out and skillfully hugged the black-haired young man. Leaning on his shoulder, she let out a sigh of relief. Because of their bloodline, Xia Luo had always been worried about Luoya's safety. One must know that this world didn't only have those sleeping gods, but also their followers and heretics. For example, the Saint Heroes Society or similar organizations might still exist in this era. In the eyes of these people, Luoya was an enemy that must be eliminated. Compared to them who were hiding in the dark, Luoya and the others could only do their best to strengthen the defense around them. Dear, I'm afraid I can't accompany you to Sharon Forest this time. I know. At this time, it's impossible to let the 2 of us travel alone. Looking at the beautiful girl in front of him who had a criminal record, Luoya helplessly smiled bitterly. Originally, Xia Luo was the most suitable person to travel with Luoya, but her identity as a kidnapper made her disqualified. It's okay, it's good that you stay. The situation in Sharon Forest is uncertain. I'll go check it out first. A few hundred years have passed. We still don't know if the Ent is still alive or not. Okay, but promise me, once you discover danger, don't act recklessly. Come back first and we'll discuss. Don't worry, don't you know me? I'm very steady. Looking at the young man who patted his chest without any self-awareness, Xia Luo's expression was conflicted for a long time before she sighed softly. Do you think that as the only son of a marquis family, you should experience the side effects of dying? This? Although I can eliminate your side effects, and I'm very happy to be with you every day, but dear, I don't want to see you in pain again. Chapter 219. Young Master Luoya? Is that the young master of the Akate family that we have been protecting? Yes, that's him. Within the Iron Wall Mercenary Corps Armory in Rosetta City, Cynthia, the tall and slender commander, frowned as she looked at the clerk of the corp with dissatisfaction. You want us to be transferred to Akate territory? Are you kidding me? No, this is a notice from the officials of Rosetta City. They said that there was a change in the contract, and that it was transferred to Akate territory. They want us to listen to young Master Luoya's orders in the future. As for the salary, that's the theocracy. Cynthia's roar interrupted the clerk's explanation, and also shouted out the thoughts of the members nearby. The theocracy of Saint Maester was famous for its stability and ease of living in the human world. It was the base of the Holy See and a place of pilgrimage for thousands of Shia believers. It was beautiful and holy, but for the heretics the situation was completely different. It was dangerous. Since the twin wars of the theocracy 200 years ago, the heretics began to move out of the theocracy in large numbers. Today, there were very few heretics in the theocracy, and the relevant laws seemed to be stricter. The atmosphere in the theocracy of Saint Maester and Rosetta was completely different. In fact, the Iron Wall Mercenary Corps had been established for so many years, but they had never done any business in the theocracy of Saint Maester. This time, Xia Luo gave them too much money, so they made an exception and accepted it. But this time, they were detained by the theocracy, and they did not expect to get into such big trouble. Can we refuse? At least not in Rosetta. What about money? It's useless. This is the decision of the higher-ups. The old clerk stroked his beard and sighed. He looked at the beautiful commander and said, If you want to refuse, I'm afraid you will have to negotiate. You will have to talk to young Master Luoya face to face. Hey, you want the commander to meet a noble? No, it's too dangerous. The old clerk's words caused an uproar in the room. The members present were all agitated and tried to dissuade her. The reason was simple. Due to Cynthia's beauty and identity as a woman, she rarely saw outsiders, especially nobles. Meeting them often meant trouble. Due to her beautiful appearance and her identity as a female heretic, Cynthia had been pestered by quite a few disgusting nobles in the past. In fact, these nobles would even condescendingly request for her to become their mistress. The moment she thought of this, her stomach was filled with rage. Cynthia was 30 years old this year. As an extraordinaire, she looked like she was 18 years old. It could be said that she was youthful and beautiful. As the daughter of the previous leader, she had been in the mercenary group since she was young and had extraordinary talent. Today, she was already a level 3 source rank expert. If she was a possessor of 3 origin substances, these nobles probably wouldn't have dared to speak to her like this even if they had their guts broken. However, she was a heretic, and discrimination was a common attitude among the nobles, let alone the nobles of the Saint Maester theocracy. In my opinion, there are no good people in the Pope's country. Previously, Morton and his mercenary group didn't even get half of the money because they were heretics. That's nothing. Previously, they were attacked and detained by the regular army because they were marching in the Pope's country. It was the headquarters of Loche's side that collected the money to redeem them. The noise in the room continued. Examples of how the nobles of the Pope's country had harmed the heretics were brought up one after another, causing the brown-haired beauty's face to turn gloomy. Cynthia held her chin as she weighed the pros and cons. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had to go. As the saying goes, the situation is stronger than the person. Whether it was Loche's side or the Audiobook family, she couldn't afford to offend them. After a long silence, Cynthia spoke of her decision. I understand. I'll talk to him personally. In the luxurious carriage, the fully armed Cynthia took a deep breath and tried to calm her nervous emotions. This time, she dared to come personally not because she was brave but because she had carefully considered it. The main reason was that she had once escorted Luoya to Audiobook. Luoya should be 13 years old this year. At this age there was a huge gap between him and Cynthia. On the other hand, as a guard, Cynthia had seen the young miss of the Sorofia family act intimately with him more than once. She heard that the two of them were engaged. Now that Luoya was living in the famous bird garden of the Sorofia family, no matter how she looked at it, the Luoya here would not touch her due to etiquette. Otherwise, it would be a public slap to the Sorofia family's face. Even if he had bad intentions, the source rank 3 Cynthia was not afraid. He was just a child. His status might be high, but how much strength could he have when he was spoiled? Moreover, he looked sickly. Chapter 220. The moment Luoya's hand touched Cynthia's head, a faint yellow curse appeared on the young man's body out of thin air, and rushed into the woman's body through Luoya's arm. The next moment, a huge impact made Cynthia's body stiffen. It wasn't an impact caused by an attack. In fact, Luoya didn't use any curse at all. It was a kind of suppression. It wasn't the amount of curse power, but the difference in quality. As the original Earth Mother, Paitila's power was the purest among all the Perseverance source substances. Although the believers who obtained the Perseverance source substance after countless years could also enjoy the afterglow, the difference between them and her was very obvious. This was also the reason why the ancient gods could easily affect the downstream units. The power of the Mother Earth was spreading, and from Cynthia's perspective, she had arrived at a valley. The majestic sky-devouring python was slowly appearing in front of her eyes. That was the majesty of the Mother Earth in ancient times, the most primitive manifestation of their power. Anyone who looked at it would feel a sense of subservience, just like the pilgrimage of a believer to the gods. Cynthia's body was in this illusion. The curse power quickly circulated, and the old wound on her abdomen started to heat up. The faint yellow curse power with an indescribable vitality began to fully heal her chronic illness that couldn't be cured with medicine. The brown-haired woman was shocked when she sensed the state of her body. Although the Perseverance source substance had the attribute of vitality, she had never seen such pure power before. The recurrence of old injuries was the biggest reason why the average mercenary's life was short. Unlike the physical injuries in Luoya's previous life, Shiya's injuries were difficult to completely heal due to the curse power. For example, rare poisons, special curses, and bloodline curses. These were things that could stick with you for the rest of your life. Cynthia's abdomen was once injured by a cultist during a mission. The special bloodline curse power completely lost its way after killing the enemy. Although it was suppressed and treated to a certain extent, at midnight, Cynthia would occasionally be awakened by the pain of the old wound. For this kind of injury, the best treatment institution among the people was the church. However, as a cultist, she had no chance. Cynthia herself knew that she might be able to hold on in her prime, but after 100 years, she was terminally ill. This old wound was very likely to be the cause of her death, just like the mercenaries in the group and her father. But today a sudden change changed her fate. In this unprecedented warmth and blessing, Paitila's voice rang in her ears. Previously, when Cynthia rejected his proposal, Luoya stared at her body. Naturally, it wasn't because he was lustful. In fact, he was observing her through Paitila's power. After infusing the power of the Earth Mother into her body, Luoya had completely completed his mission. Looking down at the woman who closed her eyes and trembled slightly, Luoya couldn't help but sigh. Before this, Luoya had informed him that the Iron Wall army was very resistant to the Church of Saint Maester. However, he didn't expect it to be to this extent. Now that external conditions couldn't affect them, only Paitila could turn the situation around. At the end of the day, the reason why Luoya urgently needed an armed force was because it wasn't cost-effective for him to do it himself. Moreover, as the deputy lord, doing too much would damage his dignity and dignity. In fact, after reaching level 4 of source rank, Luoya's hands were itching. However, after careful consideration, he realized that no matter what kind of side effects he had, he would need the help of the girls to remove them. Even if he used the holy blade to heal himself, the Nuaire might still find out. If Luoya was discovered, he would be warned and the girls would cry and complain. Crying. This was what Luoya was most afraid of. Whether it was Ai Lizzie or Xia Luot, he couldn't stand the sight of tears. As for the Nuaire, Miss Angel wouldn't cry. However, strictly speaking, she had the authority to confine Luoya. As for what would happen after he was imprisoned, thinking of this, the black-haired youth shuddered. He turned his head and looked at the woman beside him. As the spell power gradually decreased, Cynthia gradually opened her eyes. Seems like it was a good dream, Miss Cynthia. Lord Holy Son, I apologize for my previous rudeness. Please forgive my ignorance. Holy Son? Why is she calling me that again? When the black-haired youth heard Cynthia's words, it was as if he was dreaming of the small church during the Gemini War. However, after careful consideration, it seemed that the word holy was associated with the spokesperson of God. Seems like Pay-Tila has explained my situation clearly. Yes, the great existence has already sent down an oracle for me and bestowed me with his blessings. The brown-haired woman said and couldn't help but feel apologetic. Previously, she had doubted Luo Ye's character. She thought that as a great noble of the theocracy, he would definitely discriminate against heretics. However, after receiving the oracle, Cynthia was surprised to find that Luo Ye's purity was much higher than hers. If Luo Ye's position was placed in ancient times, in a heretical religion like the unyielding Perseverance sect, he would be the #1 person under God. In any sect, those who dared to go against the will of the high priest would be punished by God. It could be said that he was the standard embodiment of authority. In fact, the current Luo Ye should be able to do the same. However, this young master of the Audiobook family had never forced her to communicate with him. Even when he was rejected, he didn't get angry. Instead, he gave her his blessings. This made Cynthia very touched. Recalling Luo Ye's words, the woman's heart no longer doubted him. Instead, she couldn't help but feel a trace of hope. Although the Shia world was large, there were very few nobles who stood on the side of the heretics. Nobles like the Audiobook family who owned a territory with real power were even more unheard of. Luo Ye was the Holy Son, so it was impossible for him to betray them. Cynthia and the others might really be able to follow him and get rid of their uncertain lives. If in the future, the theocracy's attitude towards the heretics changed like Luo Ye said, thinking until here, Cynthia's heart became excited. She slightly changed her squatting posture to kneeling on one knee. She covered her chest with one hand and lowered her head to the black-haired youth. Lord Holy Son, I, Cynthia Ankit, represent the entire Iron Wall army. I'm willing to pledge my loyalty to you. Chapter 221. Cynthia's loyalty came too quickly, so fast that Luo Ye couldn't react in time. Obviously, the influence of the gods on the followers of the lower reaches was far beyond Luo Ye's imagination. Of course, part of it was also because of Luo Ye's reputation. It was a reasonable choice for the heretics to follow the Holy Son because the Holy Son could communicate with the gods and give them blessings. These benefits were real, not to mention that Luo Ye was also a powerful feudal lord. Although Sorophia had always treated the heretics well, they still believed in the 3 origin substances. In times of emergency, they could completely cut off their ties with mercenary groups like the Iron Wall Army. In this regard, Luo Ye was different. As the Holy Son, he wouldn't abandon the unyielding church. He was truly one of them. Although Cynthia's decision was bold, it was well-founded. Luo Ye welcomed it and further formulated a plan. Although there was the blessing of Pay-Tila's extraordinary power, people still needed to eat. Material rewards were the most reliable source of motivation. Luo Ye, who had seen a lot of wolf culture in his previous life but didn't give overtime pay, was very clear about this. With a name, he also needed material rewards. Only then would he be able to exchange for the greatest loyalty. No one was a fool. The Iron Wall Army had been operating in Luot for more than 10 years. Whether it was their network, intelligence network, or station, they had invested a lot. They had even bought a lot of properties. It would be a pity to abandon them. At the very least, Luo Ye couldn't make Cynthia do such a thing. On the other hand, the Iron Wall Army had been serving as Xia Luot's bodyguards for many years, so he didn't want to change them. Ensuring the loyalty of Xia Luot's bodyguards was not an easy task. After so many years, he might as well continue with it. Otherwise, if something were to happen to Xia Luot, Luo Ye would regret it for the rest of his life. On the other hand, Luo Ye had incorporated the Iron Wall Army, which could be considered as having Luo Ye's men to protect Xia Luot, which could be said to be even more reassuring. Thus, after discussing with Cynthia, Luo Ye decided on a temporary plan. The Iron Wall Army would be temporarily divided into the Akart Territory Headquarters and the Luo Chateau Branch. The Luo Chateau Branch would be as per normal, while the Akart Territory would give the soldiers a special mental allowance. Furthermore, The Akkart territory would be fully responsible for the accommodation, training facilities, and living areas. They would even be willing to provide assistance to their relatives. The current Iron Wall Army could be said to be Luoya's most important military force, even more so than the Akkart family's own army, because this military force was his personal military force. What was a personal military force? Even if Luoya was not the lord of Akkart territory, Cynthia and the rest would still follow him because of his identity as the Holy Son. It was equivalent to being his personal army, which could be said to be the most reliable trump card. Cynthia was extremely moved by Luoya's investment in resources, and also confirmed her guess. Luoya really treated them as his own people. Feeling that she had found the leader of an organization, the young lady discussed with the youth for a few hours. Originally, Luoya wanted to invite her for lunch, but seeing Cynthia's heavy armor, he dismissed the idea. After all, the clothes under the armor were not very formal, and it would be impolite for a lady to take off her armor. While they were busy with the incorporation, time slowly passed, and the time for Nua Iyer and Ka Dia to leave was approaching. Seems like it's time to say goodbye again. How is it, can't bear to part with me? In the reception room of Celta Pavilion, the blonde girl gently took a sip of tea, and looked at the youth in front of her with nostalgia. After listening to Nua Iyer's words, Luoya looked away, and after thinking for a while he sighed. A little. Oh, I see. I feel that you have become more honest in recent years. I just want to use the time we have to meet effectively. After all, you are still very busy. Indeed, I have been too busy in the past 2 years. Her Royal Highness heard Luoya's words and felt a lot of emotions. She touched her cheeks and looked at the youth, and suddenly stood up after a while. Nua Iyer? Don't move. The girl's body moved closer to Luoya, and her body fragrance made the youth's brain a little dizzy. The blonde girl knelt on the chair and looked down at Luoya, and reached out her hand to touch his chest. Actually, I think that your sad expression when we parted was very cute, but the parting is a little painful for me. What a contradictory feeling. I say, do you know what I regret the most recently? What? I shouldn't have encouraged you that day. After listening to Nua Iyer's wonderful speech, the black-haired youth had a headache and covered his forehead. Miss Angel saw this and smiled. It can't be helped, your troubled expression is really cute, and it is still the same now. I have said before, don't seduce me like this. Chapter 222. On the first day away from Rose, he missed them. Inside the carriage, Luoya was lying on a soft bed, looking at the stars in the sky like a lonely old man. When they left Rose, Xia Luot specially modified a luxurious carriage for Luoya. The exquisite exterior decoration of the carriage was greatly simplified to fit the appearance of a caravan, but a lot of effort was put into the interior. The ceiling was also transformed into an adjustable skylight that allowed one to see the night sky. In addition to being afraid that Luoya would be bored, Miss Xia had other plans. For example, she hoped that the beautiful starry sky would remind Luoya of the night they spent together in the Warren Mountains, thus strengthening his longing for her. In fact, when Xia Luot saw Luoya send Ai Lizi away, she was relieved. But even so, Xia Luot could not stop Luoya from thinking about his sister, especially when he was traveling alone at night. Another function of the skylight was to divert Luoya's attention. However, it turned out that the effect was limited. It had to be said that although the days in Rose City were noisy, Luoya actually enjoyed it very much. After all, he ate well and lived well. When he was free, he could be Xia Luot's model and wear new clothes. Most importantly, Nua Iyer and Ka Dia, who were rarely seen, had returned. Although the atmosphere when everyone gathered together was not very harmonious, it was good for Luoya. It was always difficult to part after meeting, let alone leaving the noisy city and coming to the wilderness. At this time, it had been a few hours since they left Rose City. Under the cover of the night, Luoya and the others traveled all the way until midnight. According to the habits of caravans, no matter how hurried they were, they should rest at midnight. After all, the wilderness late at night was too dangerous. Not only was it good for bandits, many nocturnal monsters would also start to move during this time. Mr. Luoya, who disguised himself as a merchant, naturally did not want to cause more trouble. The caravan stopped at a shelter by the official road to rest. Luoya looked at the cloaked figure outside the carriage door, and could not help but speak. "Cynthia, you don't have to stay here. There shouldn't be any danger tonight." "But my lord." "It doesn't matter. The public security on the Rosetta Road is pretty good, and it's not far from the city. Don't forget, I'm not completely helpless." "I see. I've offended you, Lord Holy Son." The brown-haired woman nodded slightly upon hearing Luoya's words. She couldn't help but feel grateful and respectful. When the Iron Wall army learned that Luoya was the Holy Son who was protected by the gods, their first reaction was actually suspicion. But after more than 10 high-level representatives met Luoya under the leadership of Cynthia, this suspicion disappeared. Luoya did not let Paitila bless them. After all, blessings were like rewards. Luoya chose to show his strength in a crowded place. So in the courtyard of the 100 Birds Hall, the Hydra staff used Body of Rebirth, for the first time in Luoya's peak state. Together with Paitila's power, it turned into a 10-meter-long rock python. Facing the god's body that emitted golden light and pressure, the high-level members of the Iron Wall army almost did not dare to look directly at it. They could only crawl down and kowtow. According to Paitila, this seemed to be a normal phenomenon. Only Cynthia, who was the highest source level, could barely withstand this pressure. "Wait, what about me? How can you be the same as them?" Paitila's words carried a motherly love, which made Luoya blush a little. He felt helpless. Luoya was only the Holy Son in name, but Paitila really wanted to be his mother. After a short oracle, Paitila disappeared. The mercenaries also changed the object of their kowtow to Luoya. This made the black-haired youth feel awkward. He hurriedly asked Cynthia to stop them. It must be known that the high-level members of the Iron Wall army, except for the genius Cynthia, were all old people in their 70s or 80s. No one could stand the sight of them lining up in a row to kowtow. Luoya looked at this scene and felt that his lifespan was decreasing. So after some comforting, the old people finally calmed down a little. But when they heard that Luoya was going to take them back to Akat Hill, they began to cry with gratitude. It could not be helped. The pagans who had been wandering for a long time really longed for a stable place to belong. This was a feeling that non-pagans in this era could not understand. First, they knelt together, then they cried together. This scene changed so quickly that the only two young people present, Luoya and Cynthia, had a headache. Luoya was fine, but Cynthia, as the leader, was flustered. Fortunately, the black-haired youth saw that the situation was not good and changed the topic. He mentioned that they needed guards for this trip. "If you say this, I won't cry anymore." When the old people heard this news, they were excited, and then they enthusiastically signed up. The 10 old men who were still crying a second ago were fighting for a place in their team. Some said that their beliefs were firm, some said that their equipment was good, and some said that there were more young people in the team. For a while they were fighting fiercely. Everything would be different the first time. It was the same for the first guard mission. Because people were lazy, it was normal for the team that they were used to not like to change. In other words, if this mission was done well, the whole team might be directly transferred to the personal army. This was a great honor. The old men naturally knew this truth, so they fought with each other until their faces turned red. Everyone wanted to fight for a chance to be close to Luoya for their warriors. After all, they had seen Cynthia's example. Ever since she received the blessing and recovered from her old injuries, Cynthia's spirit and complexion had improved a lot. Furthermore, according to her, the speed of her curse had also increased. This meant that her mutation speed would be faster. According to Cynthia's age, there was even hope for her to break through again in the future. Such a large bonus made people jealous, but the gap between the Iron Wall Army's teams was not very big. For a time, it was difficult to determine who was better. In the end, Luoya could not stand it anymore, and simply ordered the teams to be mixed according to the quota. Only then did the Iron Wall Army's thousands of people form an elite team of 30 people. In the team of 30 people, there was 1 source level 3, 20 source level 4, and 9 source level 5. The source level 5 people basically had special bloodline curses or skills, for example, the cooks. That's right, this team. Even the cooks were source level 5. If they were placed in the regular army, they would be considered as the captain. This team could no longer be described as being able to fight. Luoya estimated that even her father's personal army was not this fierce. From this point, it could be seen that the unyielding Perseverance Church had some skills. Chapter 223. Next to the bonfire under the moonlight, the brown-haired woman wiped the long sword in her hand and looked in the direction of Luoya's carriage with vigilance. In the entire camp, 5 night watchers were in different directions, and the curse vessel had been activated. Of course, in order not to disturb the Son of God, Cynthia did not include Luoya's carriage in the scope of the curse vessel, but it should be enough. In theory, all of Shiya's curses needed a medium to carry them. These mediums could be water, fire, or earth. Even the most illusory curse needed to be transported by curse power. The only thing that could barely escape this theory was the rare space curse, but the distance was the biggest limitation. As for Luoya's carriage, it was impossible to invade with space curse. Seraphia had produced the gemstone necklace fleet, so they were very familiar with space curse. Luoya's carriage itself was set up with a barrier. Not to mention others, even Xia Luo's space bomb couldn't jump in. Therefore, after confirming that there was no abnormality on the ground and in the sky, as long as Cynthia guarded the door, Luoya should be safe. At least, that was what the serious and responsible captain thought. However, she didn't know that some extremely special bloodlines could use natural phenomena that were not caused by the person as a medium. For example, moonlight. Inside the carriage, the silver-haired girl gently stretched out her fingertips, and a faint light began to spread and floated in the carriage. The sleeping curse was like a lullaby, making the boy sleep deeper. After confirming that everything was going smoothly, AI Lizzie was completely relieved. Now Luoya's parking location was not far from Rosetta City, but it was also very close to Akat Hill. AI Lizzie had to follow for a few more days before showing up to avoid being sent back by her brother. Since Luoya coughed up blood because of AI Lizzie's anger, the girl was very afraid of Luoya's anger. However, as a sister who grew up with Luoya, AI Lizzie knew Luoya too well. As long as the journey was far, her brother would definitely not let her go home, and would definitely take her with him. As long as it was an established fact, what was done could not be undone. With Luoya's spoiling of her, the boy could only sleep with her in the end. AI Lizzie was very clear about this matter. Brother is really cute when he's asleep. Thinking so, AI Lizzie's cheeks gradually began to redden. Luoya usually had to maintain his dignity as the acting lord, so that people would not subconsciously look down on him due to his age. But when he was sleeping, the completely relaxed boy's cheeks would soften a lot. This was also one of the reasons why AI Lizzie secretly came to see Luoya at night. Feeling the warm breath, AI Lizzie felt that her emotions were gradually getting out of control. Under the moonlight, the girl leaned down and kissed the boy lightly, but this was not enough to satisfy her. AI Lizzie's curses were actually similar to sleeping pills. It could cause people to enter a deep sleep, but sleeping did not mean that they would not be woken up. Overly intense movements could also cause them to wake up, so the girl's kisses could only wander around the lips and not go deeper. AI Lizzie's eyes were in a daze, but at least she knew that she could not expose herself, so she could only kiss from the lips all the way to the neck. But this not only did not relieve the burning in her body, but it also made the heat even more intense. AI Lizzie moaned and could not help but want to do something else. But at the crucial moment, Luoya's unconscious groan gave her a fright. AI Lizzie heard Luoya's groan, and immediately straightened her body. But the black-haired boy only adjusted his posture and fell silent again. The girl who had a false alarm heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, her mind became much clearer. She panted heavily to calm her breathing and reached out to touch her abdomen. After thinking for a moment, she shook her head slightly. No, it's still too early. The baby won't be born. As the young girl muttered to herself, she bit her lower lip, unwilling to give up. In Shiya, the physiological education of the nobles was relatively complete. In order to prevent children who did not know how to behave, The young ladies would be forced to attend physiological classes after their first menstrual period, and the consequences of tasting the forbidden fruit too early would be clearly explained. Ai Lizzie listened to Anna's classes and heard about the risks and dangers of premature birth due to the immature pelvic bones. Only then did she suppress her restless heart. It had to be said that Anna's classes were very pertinent. In this aspect, no matter how much the maids supported their young mistress, they did not dare to joke about it. In fact, the highest mortality rate for noble ladies was childbirth. Even low-level extraordinaires could have accidents. Of course, because of her bloodline, Ai Lizzie did not need to worry at all in this aspect. She was immortal under the moon, and could even skip the problem of her pelvic bones and undergo a cesarean section. But there was another problem, and that was that such an unnatural child would not be able to receive Shia's blessing. This was a major disadvantage among the nobles. Ai Lizzie naturally did not want the child of her and Luo Ye's love to suffer such grievances, so she could only grit her teeth and wait until she reached adulthood. Thinking of this, the silver-haired girl calmed down a lot. She looked around and shook her head awkwardly. Without a doubt, Ai Lizzie was also dissatisfied with the environment here for her first time. Although the carriage prepared by Seraphia had a different kind of excitement, it made Ai Lizzie feel that it was very informal, and she had the illusion that she was a third party. If she really wanted to be intimate with her dear elder brother, it would have to be at Akat's house, their love nest in the mansion. It would not be good to be in the wilderness. Ai Lizzie dismissed the idea and lay down gently beside the boy. She looked at Luoya's cheek and closed her eyes. Let's leave it at that for tonight. The next morning, Luoya's carriage set off at dawn. The boy, who had not woken up so early in a long time, was surprised to find that he was in good spirits. After thinking for a while, Luoya could only attribute it to the good quality of sleep last night. Although they were in the wilderness, the natural scenery did seem to be good for sleeping. But for some reason, Luoya's lips felt a little awkward. What's the matter? Can camping in the wilderness hurt one's lips? Luoya was a little confused about this matter, but she soon forgot about it. After all, it was just a small matter. Perhaps she just bumped her teeth when she turned over at night. Otherwise, there was no other explanation. Chapter 224. St. Freya Academy was an academic institution with hundreds of years of history. It was also the core area of the entire country of scholars, Bucharest. The word Freya originated from Freya in the ancient Austinian language. Freya was the god of knowledge and truth. He had a wide range of beliefs in ancient Austinian. Legend had it that one of the three major source substances of mankind, wisdom, originated from him. In the Second Era, there was even a statue of this god at the entrance of the academy. At that time, Freya was said to be a dignified man. But just like in Luoya's previous life, Guanyin Bodhisattva changed from a man to a woman in the process of spreading religion. A god that no one had ever seen before was also a problem in Xia, a world where information transmission was underdeveloped. Especially from the end of the Second Era to the beginning of the Third Era, too much culture was lost, and a lot of content was changed. On the other hand, whether or not gods had a gender had also caused a great deal of discussion in the academic community in the early Third Era. Although this question was useless from Luoya's point of view, it was very important for many believers of that era. So after a long period of tearing each other apart, the old man Freya was swept into the trash heap of history and turned into Freya, the goddess of knowledge and truth. At least, this was what the country of scholars thought. Luoya seriously suspected that this group of scholars had been single for too long, and did not want to see a man even when they were worshipping a god. But he had to admit that the country of scholars had put in a lot of effort to build this academy that had the name of the god of knowledge and truth as its signboard. St. Freya Academy was the best choice for the nobles in Xia to graduate from. It was also the top of the entire academy's chain of contempt. It could be said to overlook the world. To some extent, it was similar to the Tokyo University of Japan in Luoya's previous life. Almost all the upper-class nobles graduated from this academy, such as Luoya's father, Kadia. As a place where talents gathered, St. Freya Academy was also the initial stage for Recorder's Eye. To this day, Luoya's flag-raising journey could be said to be quite successful. Akhate territory was thriving under his leadership. Ai Lizi Nuair and Xia Luot were all raised by him one after another. Especially Xia Luot. It could be said that it was completely unexpected. Luoya originally just wanted to raise some favorability, but in the end, it unexpectedly progressed to this extent. Now that 3 of the 4 heroines were gone, the lineup that besieged Luoya to death in the game could be said to have completely collapsed. However, Luoya had to admit that he was not completely at ease. If Nuair was the one with the strongest attack power among the heroines, Ai Lizi was the one with the strongest performance in that plot, Xia Luot was the one with the least impact, and she was the one who supported Luoya. Then the last heroine, Lillian Aikman, was the most troublesome one. Yes, the current princess of the Austin Empire was the last person who besieged Luoya to death in Recorder's Eye. Luoya didn't know much about this person, even less than Xia Luot. However, there was one thing that firmly attracted the attention of all the players at that time, and that was her identity. Lillian Aikman was nominally the elder sister of Paul Aikman, who was an illegitimate child. The two were directly related by blood. Normally, this kind of character could not be used as a heroine. After all, if it was true, then it would be a German orthopedic plot, but it did not seem to be the case. These 2 people were actually not of the same bloodline, and the problem should be with Paul. It was obvious that as the daughter of the Austin Empire's emperor, Lillian's identity could not be faked. After all, it was too difficult to be the Green Empire's emperor Lucas Aikman. The Austin people were not idiots. As a big country with the abnormal ideology of the pureblood faction, they had always valued bloodline. It was impossible for them to let this happen. In fact, when the prince and princess were born, it was necessary to walk in front of the curse vessel that could detect the bloodline. After growing up, there were also many treasures that needed to be activated by the royal bloodline. Lillian had lived in the Austin Empire for more than 10 years, so there was no possibility of faking it. If it was possible, it could only be Paul who was suddenly found among the people. He had only stayed in the Austin Empire for a short time before he was sent to the academy in Bologna, the country of scholars. Only his experience could avoid the layers of screening. But if Paul was a fake Austin royal bloodline, there was something wrong with the plot. So for Luoya, who basically only remembered the common plot, this matter was a bit confusing. Many hidden secrets were probably only revealed in the Lillian plot, but these were not important to him. What he cared about was another point. That was Lillian Aikman. For some reason, she was very hostile to Luoya in the plot, not after Luoya revealed his identity as a cultist, but at the beginning. For this reason, Luoya was still very confused. He could only attribute it to Lillian's innate intelligence. She keenly discovered Luoya's abnormality in the plot and had doubts but no evidence, so she took countermeasures. From this point of view, Luoya's current situation was still very optimistic. After all, joining a cultist was already impossible for Luoya, who had awakened his bloodline. So, isn't the situation looking good for us? After thinking for a long time, Luoya blinked and suddenly felt that his future seemed to be bright. In this case, it would be fine even if he didn't pull out Lillian's flag. Thinking about it, how could there be so many people who were prejudiced against him? After all, Xia Luot's situation was in the minority, and the probability was so small that it could be ignored. The Austin Empire where Lillian was from was thousands of miles away from him, so how could it have anything to do with him? Sigh, I'm overthinking it. The black-haired young man thought so and heaved a sigh of relief. He smiled at his beautiful future. As expected of me, I've completed all my goals before entering the academy. Thinking so, Luoya stood up, picked up the teacup on the table, and elegantly and calmly took a sip of tea. Although his side's victory was already certain, he still had to be careful with his own life. Besides, the academy wasn't just a matter of Luoya's fate. There were more realistic situations such as finding the scholar. After confirming his goal, Luoya put down the teacup and looked out the window at the mercenaries who were in a strict formation. Then, he looked at the empty carriage that didn't even have a maid. For a moment he couldn't get used to it. Is this a solo trip? Life is as lonely as snow. As the young man said so, He reached out and rubbed his still awkward lips. Chapter 225. It had been 3 days since he left Luosai City, and Luoya felt that there was something wrong with his journey. Why is my mouth a little swollen? Looking at his bright red lips in the mirror, Luoya's head was full of question marks, and his eyes revealed a deep sense of confusion. Although before the start of this journey, Luoya had thought about the possibility of diseases such as acclimatization, he had to admit that the current situation was a little beyond his understanding. Swollen mouth. What kind of disease could this be? Could it be that eating too much roasted meat made him heaty? No, it didn't happen before. After all, how could an extraordinaire's body be so weak? Luoya couldn't figure out what was wrong with himself, so he could only call Cynthia over and ask if this was a common disease during the journey. Cynthia looked at him, and her expression was a little awkward. "My lord, your mouth seems to be a little swollen." Cynthia carefully observed for a long time and said so. Luoya couldn't help but be a little speechless. He could only hold his chin and look at the ground, thinking about the reason. However, it was this action that made the young man's dilated pupils suddenly focus, and he stared at the ground like needles. This time, when Sorophia modified the carriage, she took into account the possibility of a battle, so the interior of the carriage didn't use a soft carpet that could make one unstable. Instead, she used a special floor that could increase one's grip on the ground. Because of this, some things that normally wouldn't be left behind on the carriage were clearly visible, such as footprints. The black-haired young man stared at the faint footprints on the ground, and his expression gradually became unsightly. It wasn't that no one entered Luoya's carriage, or rather, it was to report to him about the daily itinerary and route. Cynthia and the others entered many times, but Luoya could be sure that these footprints didn't belong to any of the guards, because the footprints were too small, and it even made him suspect that they belonged to a child. A child, in the middle of the night when he was asleep, entered his carriage surrounded by guards? Thinking of this possibility, Luoya's hair stood on end. Although ghosts did exist in Shiya's world, and there were many ways to get rid of them, the horror of someone staring at him at night still made him feel very uncomfortable. On the other hand, the thing that could leave behind footprints was probably not a ghost, but something more advanced. The most common legend was that there were banshees in the forest that sucked the lives of travelers, but these records were from hundreds of years ago. Luoya didn't believe that he could encounter such a thing like winning the lottery, but even if it was a human, the nature of this matter was very serious. The carriage of the Audiobook family's heir wasn't a public transport. Not everyone could get on it. After thinking for a while, the black-haired young man calmed down and called out to Cynthia with his usual tone. "Cynthia, give me the map." "Yes, sir." The brown-haired woman took the map and entered the carriage, but what she saw was Luoya's serious face. The young man gently pointed to the ground, and Cynthia's face immediately turned gloomy. Half an hour later, the young lady walked out of the carriage and continued to move forward without saying a word, as if nothing had happened. Luoya was also as usual, and even took an afternoon nap. In the evening, the convoy stopped by the roadside again. After a little hunting to replenish their rations, the convoy had dinner. Luoya, who seemed to be in a good mood, even sang a song with his subordinates. After that, the black-haired young man returned to the carriage to sleep at about the same time as a few days ago. Time passed little by little, and when the silver moon hung high in the sky at midnight, Luoya's sleeping carriage lit up with a faint silver light, and a slender figure appeared as expected. The next moment, the young man exploded, and the sound of fighting filled the air. Half an hour later in the carriage, Luoya sat at the table and stared expressionlessly at the seductress, who broke into his carriage. On the bed opposite, the pitiful young lady was sitting like a duck facing her elder brother, blushing and lowering her head without saying a word. It has to be said that Luoya and Cynthia's plan to lure the enemy was very successful. At midnight, Ai Lizzie, who was in a good mood after hearing Luoya's song, appeared without any warning. However, what welcomed her was a huge bone claw and surrounded from all sides. The moment he saw Ai Lizzie's face, Luoya's actions stopped reflexively, but it was too late to stop his subordinates outside the carriage. As the leader of the Iron Wall mercenaries, Cynthia placed great importance on this journey of escorting her family's saint. She never thought that even with all her precautions, there would still be a problem. In order to make up for her mistake, Cynthia rushed in fiercely, and almost at the same time when Luoya stopped, she broke in with her men. Then, it was the public execution. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the silver-haired young lady was frozen in her position of taking off her shoes and climbing onto her elder brother's bed. The black-haired young man was also stunned, and the same went for Cynthia. The leader of the mercenaries had escorted Xia Luo before, so naturally she had seen the eldest daughter of the Akat family. However, while Luoya and Cynthia had seen each other before, the rest of the mercenaries did not recognize her. Chapter 226. Under the moonlight, Cynthia looked at the nearby guards and used her eyes to signal them not to make any noise. And in the carriage in the middle of the crowd, the silver-haired girl was silent under Luoya's gaze. Luoya had seen a lot of night raids in movies in his previous life. As one of the sources of joy, the young man was quite happy to see it. Of course, that was if it didn't happen to him. But in Shiya, this was the first time Luoya heard of such a thing. The reason was none other than their identity. Luoya was the only son of the Akat family. Every day, there would be someone on duty outside the room where he slept. There were also maids at the door waiting to be summoned. Physically speaking, a night raid was impossible. Moreover, the girls that Luoya saw were not ordinary. If they weren't the daughters of famous families, then they were the daughters of noble families. Nobles were very particular about elegance. Even in ancient times, nobles had a fixed size in their bedrooms because they had to maintain their elegance at all times. Although this kind of absurd behavior had been eliminated in this era, nobles still had to be reserved. A night raid was simply inconceivable, not to mention a woman attacking a man in the middle of the night. Moreover, they were siblings. Without a doubt, if this matter were to spread, it would be a huge blow to AI Lizi's reputation. This was also something that Luoya had a headache, but also something to be thankful about. Fortunately, the guards this time were from the unyielding perseverance sect. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Tell me, what do you think? Because I don't want to be separated from Big Brother, so? As soon as Luoya's question came out, the silver-haired girl's face immediately fell, and she pitifully bit her lips. But Anna is handling the Akat family's matters very well. I can't do anything at home, so I might as well accompany Big Brother. Accompany me? Is accompanying me the same as sneaking into the carriage in the middle of the night? Do you know what people will think if they see this? Under the angry questioning of the black-haired youth, AI Lizi's eyes became wet, and she began to sob uncontrollably. Ever since they were young, Luoya had always doted on AI Lizi, and the number of times he had reprimanded her could be counted on one hand. Now that he was really angry, the young girl was almost defenseless, and immediately burst into tears. Looking at this AI Lizi, Luoya felt a headache coming on. He had no choice but to swallow his words. He sighed and softened his tone. Sigh, do you know that if this matter gets out, you won't be able to get married in the future? Sob, I'm sorry, AI Lizi, who wanted to apologize out of reflex, was stunned. She suddenly stopped crying and blinked her eyes. Not being able to get married. Was there such a good thing? AI Lizi stared blankly for a moment like a blind monk who had discovered a dot. Luoya, who had discovered that the girl's power had suddenly been cut off, was also puzzled. AI Lizi, sob, I'm sorry. The girl hurriedly continued to cry and apologize under Luoya's strange gaze, but the eyes behind her hands lit up. Big Brother, sob, will AI Lizi really not be able to get married if I do this? This depends on the situation. The guards this time are my people, so they shouldn't be able to spread the news. Sob, if AI Lizi can't get married, will Big Brother take responsibility? What are you saying? If you can't get married, then so be it. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. Hearing the silver-haired girl's sobbing pleas, Luoya immediately patted his chest. However, the youth didn't know that AI Lizi's breathing suddenly sped up when she heard this, as if she had grasped the marriage code. So that's how it is. In other words, as long as this matter gets out, or the night attack in the future gets out. AI Lizzie's eyes flickered as she maintained her crying appearance. Seeing this, Luoya didn't feel that anything was wrong, so he didn't reprimand her anymore. When it came to education, it was enough for the child to admit her mistakes from the bottom of her heart. Endlessly reprimanding to vent one's emotions would be as bad as not doing enough. Moreover, Luoya's identity could only be considered as half apparent. After understanding all this, the black-haired youth changed the topic and carefully asked about AI Lizzie's life over the past few days. In the end, he realized that the silver-haired girl wasn't that ridiculous. In fact, AI Lizzie was in a hurry to leave the city not only to hide from Luoya, but also to speed up and catch up to Kadia. The girl actually obtained permission from Luoya's father, but what the guards in Kadia didn't know was that AI Lizzie, who had found Luoya, didn't actually show herself, but followed him all the way to the middle of the night to steal food. Chapter 227. Half a month later, on the official road of the Austin Empire's town of Baudry, a caravan entered the town in an orderly fashion. It was a caravan of around 30 people in several carriages. There were no family emblems on the carriages, but they had the common symbol of Loche's side. This meant that the caravan didn't belong to a noble family, but was under the banner of one of Loche's many merchant guilds. Without a noble background, they naturally wouldn't alarm any local nobles, but for a remote mountain village like Baudry, the arrival of a caravan was something new, and attracted the attention of the townspeople. It had to be said that this time's gathering was very rewarding. For example, they saw a pair of beautiful children who looked like they'd walked out of a painting. They were a black-haired youth and a silver-haired girl in the middle carriage of the caravan. The two of them were in the same carriage, and seemed to be a young fiancé. If you asked why they were husband and wife, the first reason was naturally because they were in the same carriage. The second reason was that although the two of them were very beautiful, the color of their hair and eyes was too different. As for the third reason, it was that the two of them were very affectionate. Every time they appeared, the black-haired youth and the silver-haired girl would stick together, either hugging or holding hands. The expression on the youth's face was fine, while the girl had a happy smile. The married women of the town were all too familiar with this expression. They were completely immersed in love, so all kinds of guesses arose. Among them, the rumor that the young master of a merchant guild had brought his fiancée on a pre-wedding trip was the most colorful. Luoya didn't know about these things, and was used to AI Lizzie hugging since childhood. Even if he knew that he was being misunderstood, he couldn't be bothered to explain. Even if he knew that AI Lizzie was always acting intimately in front of outsiders. All of Elise's mistakes can be forgiven. This is Rojas' theorem, and so far it hasn't been broken. The boy's love for the silver-haired girl is real. Even if she made a mistake, it's still the same. Luoya attributed the girl's muddle-headed night attack at the beginning of the journey as a prank. Cynthia and the others didn't dare to raise any objections, but there was no doubt that those who had seen AI Lizzie crawl into bed didn't believe it. Faced with this situation, Luoya had no choice but to strictly order everyone not to spread the news. However, AI Lizzie, who wanted the whole world to know about the night attack, so that she wouldn't be able to get married, was very dissatisfied with this order. She could only reveal to Cynthia and the others that the two of them were actually foster siblings. When Cynthia found out that Luoya was not related to AI Lizzie by blood, she heaved a sigh of relief. She was glad that her holy son did not violate ethics, and was an ordinary person with common sense. But then, the way she looked at AI Lizzie changed. That was the way he looked at his mistress. After all, from Cynthia's point of view, the two of them had already shared the same bed. Wasn't their future marriage already set in stone? However, what she didn't know was that Luoya's bed was comparable to the city walls of Russia during the 100 Years' War. As the saying went, the flag on the city wall changed. AI Lizzie's army only had the upper hand for a while, but this didn't hinder Cynthia and AI Lizzie's relationship by leaps and bounds. After finding out that the two of them weren't related by blood, the Perseverance Church also chose to side with the siblings during their daily public displays of affection. The Holy Son and Miss AI Lizzie's relationship today was also very good. Cynthia ordered her subordinates to carry the wine while looking in the direction of the carriage with a warm smile. On the carriage, Luoya was currently staring at the cup in his hand and swirling it around. After entering the town, Luoya ordered his subordinates to collect the scattered cade wine in the shops, and even the houses of the residents. As for himself, he directly went to the town's best tavern to buy a cup. Regarding this wine that had a history of more than 1,000 years, Luoya, as a historian, was actually quite interested in it. It had to be said that it was really cheap. 2 copper coins for a cup, and there was also a piece of sweet lime in it. According to the tavern owner, it was too bitter and some people couldn't drink it if they didn't put it in. Luoya heard this and tasted it on the spot, but he almost spat it out. Due to the brewing process, the alcohol content of cade wine wasn't high. Perhaps it was because of the mushrooms, but it had a valiant and numbing taste. However, the taste was really bad. Bitter, it was quite bitter, and there was a faint smell of the earth. Compared to the specialty wine of Akat Hill, it was completely opposite. Because it was too disgusting, Luoya didn't bring a cup for Ai Lizzie. When he returned, the girl's reaction after tasting it proved that Luoya's behavior was correct. It was obvious that the local specialty didn't satisfy Luoya, but for Luoya, who had personally come to the Austin Empire for the first time, there was more to observe. As a lord, it was necessary to visit foreign cities and learn from advanced experiences. After a series of observations, Luoya discovered that the Austin Empire wasn't as rich and powerful as he imagined. At the very least, the construction of the mountain towns was very poor, and even fell behind the southern mountains of Akat Hill that Luoya had ruled for a few years. Moreover, the residents' sense of belonging to the Austin Empire was also very poor. The term pureblood faction didn't have any roots here, so the inexplicable sense of superiority naturally didn't exist. This made Luoya feel very comfortable. Thinking about it, when one didn't even have enough food and clothing, who would care about the bloodline of the kingdom? It was just a bubble when one fainted from hunger. After a day of observation, Luoya once again confirmed the core idea of Akat Hill's economic development as the core. After selling some daily necessities, replenishing food, and collecting more than 20 barrels of cade wine, Luoya's group also completed their mission here. After a rare night of rest in the hotel, they embarked on the journey to Sharon Forest early the next morning. In the forest, a middle-aged man with brown hair and a gray-haired old man were moving forward in a chaotic forest. The middle-aged man was called Rodney, and the old man was called Wood. Both of them were village chiefs and part-time leaders of the pagan power sect. As the village chief and the leader of a sect, they undoubtedly had a good status, but now their appearance could only be described as embarrassing. Rodney was still young compared to Wood. He had strong firepower when he fought, so the clothes on his body were particularly tattered. The stick could be used as a mop. The gray-haired old man's situation was better. His body was wrapped in a wolfskin jacket, but most of the fur had fallen off. When the wind blew, it didn't move, so it was bald like a leather jacket. Obviously, the two people's dressing was very unsuitable for their identity. As for why, it was a long story. Since the village of the power sect had been targeted by the cultists because of the scale of the snake god, it had been 3 years. In 3 years, Rodney and others had moved home twice. They were forced to cross the mountains and escape to the Sharon Forest where people rarely went. At the same time, the whole village activated spirit vision to look for clues about the god and the son of God. Chapter 228. Early in the morning, the sun rose. Sharon Forest, which was slightly dark due to the cover of the leaves, had a new day of recovery. Diurnal animals began to come out of their nests, and the chirping of birds echoed in the forest. However, in this refreshing weather, a team of about 100 people silently walked through the forest. They were dressed in simple clothes, and many of them didn't even have shoes. The leaders were a middle-aged man with dark brown hair and a gray-haired old man. They were Rodney and Wood. At this moment, the two of them were holding weapons and looking for a good position in the forest to ambush the villagers who were hiding on both sides of the road. That's right, today the two village chiefs, the leader of the power sect, and an expert of source level 3 would turn into robbers and play the game of I opened this mountain and planted this tree. Regarding this point, the two people who had never robbed in their lives felt very embarrassed, But they couldn't do anything about it because this was the request of the Lord of the Forest. This was the first time Rodney and Wood, who had lived here for more than 2 years, heard of the request of the Lord of the Forest. After all, as a treant who had survived from ancient times, Cade didn't have most of the needs of humans. What in the world made the sage of the forest ask for help from them? Could it be that there was a big crisis here? The two people who thought so had a serious attitude, but after hearing Cade's words, their expressions became strange. I heard the news from my companions from afar. A team has brought a lot of wine here, and it's my favorite cuddy wine. Oh, that eternal delicacy. I haven't had it for almost 100 years. That night, Rodney and Wood looked at each other and listened to the tall Ent's sigh for an hour. The content of the sigh was no different from that of an old drunkard's father who had been banned from drinking by his children. The so-called request was to rob the passing carriages of alcohol. When they heard this request, the two of them were in despair, but they also let out a sigh of relief. To be honest, although Rodney and the others were grateful to the Lord of the Forest for taking them in, the power sect couldn't accept a mission that was too hard. After all, everyone's condition wasn't too good. If Cade, the ancient tree sage who could command the werewolves, couldn't solve the problem, they would naturally have to pay a big price. If that was the case, the two of them would have to decline even if they had to bear the reputation of being ungrateful. However, it was different now. Isn't it shameful to rob others? This was undoubtedly shameful, especially for a level 3 origin ranker. He was practically a beggar, but he had to admit that it was very safe. The battle between the bandits and the Chamber of Commerce's convoy could be said to be a common occurrence in an area with poor security. However, no matter which side was involved in the battle, their strength was very low, and most of them didn't even have any origin substances. Who would be willing to be a caravan guard or a bandit if they were able to reach source rank 5? Wasn't the position of a captain in the army better? Of course, there were also some wanted extraordinaires who ended up as bandits. However, even if it was a bandit group that spanned across several noble families' territories, the leader would at most be a level 4 source rank extraordinaire. It was impossible for them to be a high-level extraordinaire. There was no other reason for this. It was because once a high-level superhuman appeared, the nature of the group would change. Every country would change the definition of a group at this level to that of a rebel army, and they would immediately send out troops to wipe them out. This was because they were a threat to national security. Because of this, the upper limit of a bandit was only level 4 source rank. Naturally, the weapons used to deal with the bandits were also limited to level 4 source rank. Isn't this risk-free? It was just a caravan transporting wine. Wouldn't it be easy for either of them to capture it? Rodney and Wood, who had been thinking for a long time, looked at each other. A relaxed smile appeared on their faces, and they patted their chests and accepted this matter. Isn't it just wine? We understand. Rob, we can rob. Anyway, this mountain was originally yours. Just treat it as a toll. The two level 3 source rank old foxes immediately agreed to this request. In their opinion, this was a small matter not worth mentioning. However, if they completed it, they would be able to leave with peace of mind. After relaxing, the two returned to the village and immediately began to make arrangements. The information from the trees couldn't describe the scale of the humans, so Rodney and the others didn't know how many guards the caravan had. To be on the safe side, they brought a lot of people this morning. The process of the ambush was relatively rough. Due to the lack of bows and arrows, the people of the power sect didn't occupy any commanding heights. The plan of Wood and the others was to force them to surrender. It was best not to hurt them. They would just rob the wine and leave to avoid trouble. After hearing that it was unlikely that they would fight, and that the things they robbed were only transported by a small caravan, the warriors of the power sect were even less nervous. Their camouflage was basically just hanging 3 or 2 branches on their bodies. It was only at noon that they covered themselves with weeds because the sun was too bright. In this situation where the ambush didn't look like an ambush, and a nap didn't look like a nap, a small caravan of about 30 people came along the mountain road. However, what made Rodney and Wood a little strange was that before they entered the encirclement, the whole caravan suddenly stopped. What's going on? Could it be that they were exposed? The middle-aged man and the old man looked at each other. They knew that the ambush of the power sect was not professional enough. However, ordinary people shouldn't be able to discover it because Wood had specifically used an illusion spell. To see through this spell from such a distance, one would need to be at least level 3 source rank. Can there be a level 3 source rank expert in this team? How is it possible? It's a coincidence. Chapter 229. When the huge body wrapped in red light appeared in the valley of the Sharon forest, everyone on the scene stopped moving. Whether it was Rodney and Wood who were shouting and waving their hands, or the warrior who was covered in leaves, all the believers of the Church of Strength paused at the same time. After the stiff feeling that made their blood seem to freeze, what followed was an unbearable heavy pressure. In a short moment, almost all the believers of Power Sect knelt on the ground and lowered their heads under the heavy pressure. Only Rodney and Wood, who were high-level extraordinaries, could barely stand. On the other side of the Perseverance sect, all the mercenaries also felt their bodies sink. They were notified in advance and did not panic, but the powerful presence of the Gulen Dayer forced them to look away. Only Cynthia could barely look at this great existence for a while, but the more she observed, the more shocked she was. When one reached Cynthia's level, one's understanding of the gods would be clearer and more accurate. What kind of god, what kind of strength? These could be perceived by high-level extraordinaries. And now, in Cynthia's perception, this huge bloody skeleton was not inferior to the existence of the great mother goddess that she believed in. Double god sacrifice? How could it be? The shock in the woman's heart was indescribable with her eyes wide open. Normally, the ancient gods were harsh. They must be devout to those who could obtain their power. Not to mention 2 part-time jobs. Even if they married a woman that they did not like that much, they might lose their god's favor. However, all of this seemed to be ineffective on Luoya. Cynthia naturally did not know that the relationship between Luoya and Paitila and the others was based on an ancient equal contract. He was the guide who brought them back from their endless slumber. Such a relationship was mutually beneficial, and was far from the charity of the gods to the believers. The brown-haired woman lowered her head to look at the boy in front of her. Suddenly, she felt that Luoya's strength had become unfathomable. On the other side, the people of Power Sect were completely silent until Wood's voice sounded. Great existence, please forgive us for being disrespectful to the Son of God. During this hour, Luoya learned about the Church of Strength in detail, which was why the followers of the Gulen Dayer had turned into a bunch of beggars. What surprised him was that it seemed to have something to do with the development of the fringe by the House of Sorophia. Because of this, Ai Lizzie sympathized with the Church of Strength and strongly condemned the evil forces led by Xia Luot. Big brother, Xia Luot is really a bad woman. While Ai Lizzie was attacking, Luoya looked at the scale that Rodney gave her, and began to communicate with Paitila. Scale of the Serpent Goddess. This so-called sacred object was actually the scale of a serpent with the bloodline of Mother Earth. From Paitila's point of view, it was a relic left behind by a descendant of an unknown number of generations. The king of holy beasts would not take it seriously, but to some extent, it was not completely useless. Countless years after Petra's death, it was not easy to find a medium to carry the power of Mother Earth. The scales of this descendant of the same origin were rare. After Petra's blessing, it could become a powerful curse vessel. It was far from being comparable to when it was in Rodney's hands. It could only rely on a little bit of power after death to command the snakes. Needless to say, Power Sect was very traditional. Their respect and trust for Luoya were far higher than Fortitude Sect. Basically, all of them submitted to Luoya after meeting him. At that time, they didn't even know Luoya's name, let alone his status. Of course, there must be a reason why the Gulen Dayer appeared directly. But even if it was the scale of the Serpent Goddess that had never been given to the cultists, Rodney and others did not hide it, and directly gave it to Luoya. This was very commendable. According to Rodney and others, Power Sect's original plan was to set off to find Luoya in these few days. It was the first time they engaged in a business of robbery. They usually did not commit any crimes and did not get involved in any trouble. For these words, Luoya basically chose to believe after observing Rodney and others' attire. Indeed, with the strength of two source rank 3 extraordinaire in power sect, if they really engaged in the business of robbery, they would have become rich long ago. However, what Luoya cared about was their explanation of the reason for the robbery. "Oh, you're under someone's orders?" "That's right. We agreed to rob the caravan to repay the kindness of taking us in." "I see. But who is the master of the forest? Is he also a heretic from the fringe?" "No about that." Under Luoya's somewhat strange gaze, the stammering Rodney and Wood hesitated for a long time. In the end, they could only helplessly answer, "The master of the forest is an ancient ent." Luoya's eyes widened when he heard the two's explanation. After a series of inquiries, the black-haired young man understood what happened and felt unprecedented helplessness and surprise. Luoya had never thought that there would be a day when he would be robbed by an ent. What was even more ridiculous was that the one who ordered the robbery was a Gulen Daer believer. When he learned that the ent who took in Rodney and the others had set his sights on the dozen barrels of disgusting Cardi wine that he transported, he immediately understood the meaning of Isha Bela's words in the historical fragment. Indeed, it seemed that there was no need for any method. As long as one brought a large amount of Cardi wine into the forest, anyone would be able to encounter the ent. But after thinking about it carefully, no caravan would be willing to transport such cheap and disgusting Cardi wine. It was even more impossible to bring a large amount of wine into the forest. In fact, after the peak of the adventure season, the mountain road to Sharon Forest was almost impassable. After understanding these matters, Luoya reckoned that the ent named Cade's claim of not drinking Cardi wine for almost 100 years might be true. After explaining his purpose, Rodney and the others who were conflicted about their kindness heaved a sigh of relief. The group of them walked together into the depths of the valley. In the deep forest of the valley, the huge oak tree was as still as ever. It was spring. The trees were sprouting and the birds had also begun their large-scale activities. Sharon Forest had also begun its cycle as usual, but Cade's eyes did not open. In fact, one of the secrets of this old ent's long-term survival was staying at home. Chapter 230. When Luoya's name Akat entered the dark ear hole, the ancient ent finally found the meaning of this surname in his long memory. After understanding this surname, Cade also completely relaxed. Not an enemy. An old, hoarse voice came from the trunk, causing the monsters and werewolves that were gathering nearby to heave a sigh of relief. All kinds of monsters began to retreat in large batches. Shadows flashed in the darkness of the deep forest, and the number of shining eyes rapidly decreased. The restless werewolves also began to retreat in batches. Luoya calmly looked at the rapidly emptying forest. The crimson light on his body gradually dissipated, and the golden snake on his staff also slowly returned to the Hydra staff. A breeze blew, and the valley was calm, as if the countless monsters never came. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Cade. No, this is what I should do. But Akat, recently life is really a lot more interesting." The tall ent sighed, then looked up into the distance. Not knowing if it was an illusion, Luoya always felt that Cade's wooden eyes gradually lit up, and the next moment, the ent's voice came again. "But before that, cough, young man, do you have wine?" "Oh, this taste is still so familiar, just like Orson's black soil. It's unforgettable." In the forest of the valley, the huge ent held a wooden barrel and poured pale yellow wine into the tree hole. The hoarse voice had a kind of enjoyment and joy, but the strange metaphor made Luoya show a strange expression. When Cade asked Luoya about wine, the black-haired boy showed a well-prepared smile. With a wave of his hand, Cynthia and others brought out more than a dozen barrels in one breath. In Luoya's opinion, this was enough, but he didn't expect that the ent didn't drink with the roots, but poured it into the hole. But it had to be said that after so many years, more than a dozen barrels of wine were enough for Cade to drink. The caddy wine really scratched his itch, and Luoya had wine, so Cade's story came online. "Isha Bela, I don't know this name, but I know Queen, because in fact I am also a member of the Twilight Sage Association. My code name is Recorder, burp." The ancient ent said with a burp, which made the black-haired boy a little shocked. Luoya didn't expect that the Twilight Sage Association would even recruit Ents, but it was reasonable that Cade didn't know who Queen was. But why does the surname Akat seem familiar? For this question, the tall Ent thought for a long time, and after drinking a mouthful of wine, he let out a hoarse and helpless sigh. It's very simple, because I was a member's Twilight Sage Association, and the first president of the Sage Association, and he is your ancestor. Cade's words made the black-haired boy widen his eyes, and he couldn't help but reveal a dull question. Akat and all, this Ent's hearing isn't very good, right? Luoya thought so with a face full of doubts. Seeing this, the Ent could only explain. The Ald family, that's the era you call the Second Era, a secret family that supported the Austin Empire, and has been silently maintaining the peace of the human world. The Twilight Sage Association was originally established by them, and they recruited other races to resist various disasters together. But just like the growth of plants, there is a flourishing spring and summer, and there is a withering autumn and winter. The Twilight Sage Association suffered a major failure at the end of the Second Era, and the Austin Empire was destroyed. In order to avoid the pursuit of the Savior's believers, the Ald family was divided into 7, and one of the main branches was the Akat family. Wait, let me take a break first. Luoya hurriedly reached out his hand to stop Cade's compressed biscuits, and the black-haired boy rubbed his brows and began to understand the meaning of the Ent's words. What's the situation? The Twilight Sage Association was established by the Akat family's ancestors? And what was the Ald family? He had never heard of such a family in the Austin Empire, and there was no trace of it in the history books. And what was the Savior? Cade, is the Savior some kind of god? Why would his followers hunt down the Ald family? The Savior? I'm not too sure about his identity. He already existed when I was born, but what I can be sure of is that he is not a god. Cade's tree-lined face showed a dignified expression, and said in a low voice, that is an ancient sleeping existence, the most terrifying madness and depravity. The destruction of prosperous civilizations and the extinction of mythical races has a lot to do with him. One of the goals of the Twilight Sage Association is to prevent his awakening, but because of my race, I have very little involvement in the affairs of the Sage Association, so I don't know the specific situation. Cade's description of the Savior made Luoya couldn't help but feel a chill on his back, but then his gaze shifted. Although the terrifying existence that was still sleeping was terrifying, the enemies in the real world needed more attention, such as the believers. The believers of the Savior? What do you mean? Chapter 231. On top of the tree, Luoya, who saw the message from hundreds of years ago, stood on top of Cade in a daze. For a moment he couldn't react. He reached out and touched the engraving that occasionally flashed with a faint dark golden light. Don't believe in Eggman. What does that mean? The black-haired youth pondered in his mind. Of course he knew the meaning of Eggman. It was the name of the Austin Empire's royal family. However, the phrase "don't believe in it" was very strange because it basically represented the Akat family. At least in Roy's generation, there was a connection with the Eggman family. To be honest, Luoya was very puzzled because Akat territory was not connected to the Austin Empire geographically. When Roy wrote this message, he should only be around the age of adulthood. It was almost impossible for a child of this age to come into contact with the Austin Empire's royal family. Based on the fact that Roy was able to track them all the way to Sharon Forest, he should be a meticulous person. Such a person should not have a stereotypical impression of a place that he had never been to just based on books, or even engraved it for future generations. Then the most likely reason was a fragment of history? Luoya muttered to himself. His gaze couldn't help but sharpen. At present, he could only speculate that Roy might have experienced something in the fragment of history. Everything else was too vague. But no matter what, he did receive a message from hundreds of years ago. After reading the message, the youth landed on the ground and didn't know what to say for a moment. He hadn't met anyone from the Eggman family until now, but in the academy next year, he would definitely face this bloodline. On the other side, the tall Ent noticed that Luoya had landed on the ground and straightened his body. While drinking, he suddenly remembered something. By the way, Is the girl who came here a while ago related to you? What? Towards Cade's question, Luoya couldn't help but raise his head and ask. Seeing the youth's surprised expression, the ant understood. So that's how it is. It seems that she isn't your companion. What's the situation? That was about a month ago. According to Cade, about a month ago, a young lady in full body armor suddenly appeared in Sharon Forest. Cade didn't pay much attention to this traveler, but he didn't expect her to come straight to him. It was obvious that the other party had come prepared, and their target was Cade. However, before the slow treant could speak, the girl had already spoken, and the message she conveyed was unusually concise. Be careful, they may have found this place. This was all that the girl conveyed. After that, before Cade could react, the girl quickly left. She is most likely a descendant of one of the Twilight Sage Society's members. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to find me so accurately. As for what danger she mentioned, I don't know. Throughout the long history of the Twilight Sage Society, the Twilight Sage Society has made too many enemies. Luoya frowned deeply. Although he was glad that the descendants of the Sage Society members still existed in this world, he was more concerned about the enemy and the message, and the safety of the ancient treant in front of him. Cade, what are you going to do? You haven't moved at all for the past month, have you? That's true. But I don't have any other choice because I will be more conspicuous if I leave the forest. Cade sighed helplessly. As a 1,000-year-old treant, it was fine for Cade to hide in the forest. Once he left the valley, he would be truly unique. If he didn't leave the valley, he would enter the land of chaos, and the soil there wasn't suitable for him to grow. In such a dilemma, Cade could only choose to defend himself. For this reason, he had recently gathered a lot of demons in the valley. That was why he was able to put up such a huge formation when Luoya came. Regarding the current situation, the ancient treant was helpless, but the black-haired young man widened his eyes when he heard about these troubles. Indeed, in this world filled with humans, a treant would be exposed as soon as he left the forest, but what if the humans transported him out? It was a wonder that a tree could walk on its own. But it wasn't surprising that a human transported a tree. As for where he would be transported to, there was nothing else in the southern mountains of Audiobook territory, but there were too many trees. If Cade could bring his entourage to live there, the strength of Audiobook territory would probably increase by leaps and bounds. Cade, if you believe me, how about coming to my territory? Luoya thought about it for a long time and felt that it was feasible, so he voiced out his idea. Hearing the young man's invitation, the tall treant hesitated. But these cursed werewolves. As long as you can control them, you can transport them together, including the demons. But the risk of doing so. 5 barrels of wine a day. Let's go. Let's go. When do we leave? Chapter 232. A year later, in Blogna, the country of scholars. It was early spring, and the cold that had lasted for an entire winter in the capital, Leinster, was gradually disappearing, making people feel more comfortable. The trees on the streets were greener, and the pedestrians were wearing fewer clothes. Similar to the gradually warming weather, the city was also full of enthusiasm and vitality. There was no other reason, but it was the start of school season. Every spring, the capital of the country of scholars, Leinster, was known as the most lively place in the human world. The younger generation of all the countries in Shia would gather here, not only the nobles of the various countries, but also many people who came from afar. As a country where more than 80% of the schools in Shia gathered, there were many academies in Blogna, and Leinster, as the capital of Blogna, had the reputation of being the capital of academies. More than 60% of the areas in Leinster were educational institutions, among which there were more than 20 academies that only 14-years-old adults could enter. With so many academies recruiting students, it was natural that not only were the nobles recruited, but in fact, most of the academies were composed of commoners. Leinster Comprehensive Academy, Cecily Women's Academy, St. Wisdom's Academy, these were all famous academies funded by big schools, each with their own characteristics in different fields. But when it came to the most influential and powerful, there was only one answer, and that was St. Freya's Academy. St. Freya's Academy, the first academy in the Academy City, was built more than 900 years ago and could be said to be as old as the country. In fact, the city of Leinster was originally built around St. Freya's Academy, but in the following few hundred years, due to the increasing number of students, it continued to expand and finally reached its current scale. So how big was St. Freya's Academy's influence? This was a difficult question to answer, but according to St. Freya's biggest event every 100 years, the 100th anniversary of the school, it could be seen. All the heads of state had graduated from St. Freya's Academy, and according to Luoya's thinking in his previous life, they were basically the spokespersons of St. Freya's Academy, but this lineup of spokespersons was not as simple as just shocking, it was terrifying. Grasping the top resources, to a certain extent, would create a siphon effect, and St. Freya's Academy was the most typical example of this. When generations of emperors and kings graduated from this academy, their descendants and subordinates basically had no other choice. Unless they were stupid, they would do anything to get in. For example, the princes of various countries. When their fathers, grandfathers, and ancestors all attended St. Freya's school, it would unknowingly become a tradition. Even if they didn't want to, they had to consider whether they would be attacked by others, especially the conservative faction, if they changed schools. As for the nobles of the various countries, they had even less of a choice. Their own bosses were there, so how could they run away? As the first academy, St. Freya's Academy had started this virtuous cycle of excellent students hundreds of years ago. This advantage had continued to this day. And the reason why it was able to maintain its dominance in Bologna, the country of education, was not only because of its excellent students, but also because it had enough money. After so many years, when the graduates recalled their school days after experiencing the vicious beating of society, they would feel an indescribable sense of beauty. This did not only exist in Luoya's previous life, but also in Xia. Or rather, after experiencing the intrigue and swords, Xia's nobles had a deeper feeling. However, unlike the graduates of other academies, those who reminisced about St. Freya's Academy in their dreams were all big shots. Every year, the Academy's annual donations accounted for more than half of its income, so strictly speaking, this academy was funded by the nobles of Xia. St. Freya's Academy could be said to be the best in the Academy City of Leinster, but compared to its great reputation, there were not many students here. Therefore, the students who wore the Book of Truth badge of St. Freya's Academy naturally stood out in this city, where students made up more than 50% of the population. For example, right now, on a chair by the side of the road leading to the academy area, a young man attracted the attention of many young people passing by. It's a male student from St. Freya's Academy. Lower your voice. Looks like he's a noble, and his rank is probably not low. On the far side of the street, a few girls from Cecily Girls' Academy gathered together and chatted, their eyes occasionally stealing glances at the black-haired young man on the opposite side of the street. Nearby, there were several small groups like this. During their time as a student, some people chose to study hard to enrich themselves, while others chose to use their youth to fall in love. Everyone's choice was different, and each had their own exciting moments. But in the city of Leinster, the hormones of puberty seemed to be secreted more than in other places. It couldn't be helped. No matter how they tried to hide it, humans were animals who followed their instincts. Being attracted to outstanding members of the opposite sex was a necessity engraved in their genes. And the city of Leinster was the cradle of the young generation. Under the fame of St. Freya's Academy, its students were added with a layer of luxurious background. For girls from Cecily Girls' Academy, which had a 0 male-to-female ratio, it was almost a natural attraction. They looked at people with prejudice, not to mention the fact that the young man opposite them was so outstanding. It was a black-haired young man wearing a dark-colored coat. His appearance was handsome, his body was slender, and his calm and gentle temperament made people feel good about him. His pair of golden eyes were noble and mysterious, and his whole body exuded the noble elegance of a superior noble. At this moment, the young man was reading a book with his head lowered. From the old packaging in yellowed paper, it should be an ancient book with a long history. Beside him, a classical cane was placed. The streets were crowded with people during the school season, and noise was inevitable. But around the young man reading the book, there was a strange sense of tranquility. Wouldn't it be unladylike to ask for his name? Is he a freshman? Or a senior? It doesn't matter. Hurry up and decide. If you dawdle, the girls from St. Westwood's Academy will beat you to it. The girl groups looked at each other anxiously from afar. No one wanted to let the other get ahead of them. But in Shia, most girls were more conservative, especially those who had just entered the academy not long ago. It took a lot of courage to hit on a man. Just as they were monitoring each other and discussing endlessly, the black-haired young man on the opposite chair moved. Chapter 233. Luoya Akit was a cautious person. This was the common evaluation of everyone who knew him since his reincarnation. From the moment Luoya came to this world, he knew that he was not the chosen one. A strong sense of crisis accompanied him for a long time. Even after being accompanied by the girls, Luoya still had some strong aftereffects. One of the most important was the reverence for the plot. After living in Shia for so many years, Roha didn't think that the recorder's eye was a simple game anymore. This world was undoubtedly realistic. It wasn't so much a galga as it was. In desperation, the chosen one could only look at the abstract map and walk silently. As a result, he didn't look left and right when crossing the road, and just happened to block the carriage of the Sorofia family. He even almost startled the horse, which angered Xia Luot, who was in a hurry in the carriage. He was reprimanded by the red-haired lady. And this was the first meeting between Paul and Xia Luot. It could be said that the plot of the two people after that began to extend from this point. Of course, that was in the game. In reality, everything would change, because Luoya Akit was here. What the hell is this thing that Lisa drew? On the busy street, Paul Ackman looked at the map, in his hand with black lines all over his head. He repeatedly looked up at the surroundings and looked down to compare the map with his face full of bewilderment. It had been a month since Paul came to this city called Leinster, but in fact, the number of times he really went out of the house could be counted on one hand, because the purpose of him coming here was for closed special training. As an illegitimate child found by the spies of the Austin Empire half a year ago, Paul's 16 years of life so far could be said to be quite dull. He grew up as an orphan in a remote village of the Austin Empire, and did not receive much education from a young age. He only learned literacy and arithmetic from the retired priest in the village. The rest of the time was basically engaged in agricultural work. At that time, Paul never thought that his life would change in any way. It was not until he was almost kidnapped from the village by the spies that Paul's world changed dramatically. He suddenly became the prince of the Austin Empire. He had an emperor father who looked only middle-aged but was actually more than 100 years old. He had two brothers who disliked him to the extreme, and an elder sister whom he had never met. This was his experience in the capital of the Austin Empire, Theo. As for the most feelings, it was probably hostility and malice. The two princes of the Austin Empire were close to 30 years old, and Princess Lillian had already shown her talent. The political camp division was quite clear. In other words, there was no room for others to intervene. An illegitimate child who had low extraordinary strength, no culture, and no background. He had been wandering outside for more than 10 years, was destined to be unpopular in politics of the Austin Empire. And the nobles. Paul had lived in the capital for more than 3 months. During this period, there were 0 nobles who visited him, which could be said to be the most obvious feedback. And it was precisely because of this that Emperor Lucas of the Austin Empire had no choice but to let Paul go to school at the age of 16 to make up for the shortcomings in all aspects caused by the years of wandering outside. The 1-month closed-door training involved various fields such as politics, history, language, etiquette, swordsmanship, spells, and so on. However, even with so much training, Paul still didn't make any significant progress, especially in the aspect of extraordinary strength. He always felt that he was lacking something. But it had to be said that although he didn't get along well with the nobles, Paul got along well with the servants. As for the current situation, it was an accident. Originally, Paul's trip alone this time was a measure by the social class teacher to cultivate his self-confidence. As a student of the St. Freya Academy, he should have received the envious gazes of passers-by while wearing the badge of the Book of Truth. The difficulty of asking for directions would be halved, and he might even be hit on by girls. But the reality was that he forgot to bring it. Without the badge, he only had a map casually drawn by the maid. The huge flow of people in the big city made Paul, who grew up in the village and lived in a society of acquaintances, very uncomfortable. He called out to several girls in a row, but they all rolled their eyes at him. Probably, should I cross the road from here? Enduring the anxiety and pressure in his heart, Paul muttered to himself according to the map, but what he didn't expect was that at this time, a gentle voice suddenly sounded next to him. No, you should keep going straight. Ha! Hearing the answer, Paul, who was taken aback, raised his head and saw a smiling black-haired boy. A dark suit jacket, a white lining, a neat and beautiful bow tie, a slender but slightly thin body, and golden eyes shining with gentle light. The moment he saw Luoya, Paul was stunned for a moment, and he understood one thing reflexively in his mind. This is an aristocrat. Paul looked at the boy in front of him who seemed to be glowing. Thinking so, he couldn't help but lower his head with some inferiority. Luoya was taken aback when he saw this. He thought for a moment and asked, "Student, are you looking for the St. Freya Academy?" "Ah yes, student." "Yes, you are a student." Luoya reached out and pointed at the badge of the Book of Truth on his chest, smiling at the confused boy. Paul's eyes widened when he saw this, and he hurriedly thanked him. "Thank you, no, thank you for your help, senior. I am a freshman this year. It is my first time coming to the academy." Chapter 234. In the carriage on the road, Xiaoluot Sorofia stretched her arms and looked at the crowd on the street. She frowned slightly, feeling a little irritated. "It's been 3 months since we last met." The reddish-brown-haired girl muttered to herself, pouring out her inner worries in this empty space. Luoya Akat, the lover of the girl, was also her nominal fiancé. Since they met last year, they had experienced many difficulties and fell in love with each other for more than a year. However, the two of them had not been together much recently. Since the new year, when Luoya and Ai Lizi set off to the holy capital to reunite with Kadia, who was escorting the provisions, for more than 3 months, the princess of Saint Mestre, Nua Ayr, had been using various reasons to not let Luoya leave. She dragged the time until the start of Saint Freya's Academy, causing Xiaoluot and Luoya's plan to come to the country of scholars to be completely ruined. And counting back, it was also this woman who used the reason of the birthday party to keep Luoya for more than a month. In other words, since the end of last year, Xiaoluot's sweet time with her lover had been taken away for more than 5 months. Thinking of this, the red-haired girl trembled with anger. In fact, since they parted ways last year in Rose, Luoya had been busy. First, it took 2 months to go to Sharon Forest. Then it was an emergency meeting with Xiaoluot to discuss the relocation plan of the ants. As the initiator of the plan, Luoya followed Cade throughout the operation. The ancient ants were too big, so the transportation process was slow, and it took another 3 months. In the following time as the Lord, Luoya began to settle down the Strength sect and Perseverance sect, and revised some laws. Coupled with the problems and affairs that Akat encountered during the period of economic development, it could be said that he was very busy. In this case, Xiaoluot, who saw her lover in a terrible situation, naturally couldn't bear to stand by and watch. In fact, the help from Xiaoluot played a big role, making the girl unanimously welcomed by the people and officials of Akat, and her reputation among the people was quite high. However, as the saying goes, where there are gains, there are losses. After Xiaoluot became busy, the two had even less time to be affectionate. The reddish-brown-haired girl could not release her accumulated desires. This made the reddish-brown-haired girl extremely uncomfortable, and this irritable state was a manifestation of it. Ever since they set off for the scholar country, this had been going on for a long time. The sorrowful young lady looked out of the window. The Academy City, Leinster, was a place Xiaoluot knew she had to go since she was a child. As a family that had been revived in the last few hundred years, the Sorofia family attached great importance to integrating into the top class of Shia and the Academy City, Leinster, and St. Freya Academy could be said to be a shortcut. In the last 100 years, the Sorofia family had become the biggest financial backer of St. Freya Academy, and with the identity of successive generations of graduates and strong economic strength, the Sorofia family had successfully risen to the top class of Shia. Generally speaking, this was a good thing, and after entering the city, Xia Luot also experienced a different atmosphere from Luoya. In the early spring, the flow of people in Leinster City skyrocketed. Countless young people from all over Shia came to try their skills and enter the academy to further their studies. Coupled with the carriages of the nobles from various countries, the city gate of Leinster City was jammed when Xia Luot arrived. After entering the city, a large number of people of the same age attracted the young lady's attention. Is this the Academy City? So many young people. The young lady looked out of the window and muttered to herself. Just as she was about to pull up the curtains to block the curious gazes of the passers-by outside, a familiar figure suddenly flashed in front of her eyes. It was the back of a black-haired young man wearing a decent suit and holding a quaint cane in his hand. The moment he saw this figure, Xia Luot's mind went blank, and the next moment, the young lady's order blurted out. Stop the carriage. On the road, an exquisite carriage with the Sorofia family logo stopped by the side of the road, followed by the gazes of all the people on both sides of the road. Paul's words of praise were interrupted, and Luoya also turned his head in surprise. At this moment, the black-haired young man felt a chill in his heart, and his scalp tingled. How could it be? It was interrupted like this, but why did the carriage still stop? Could it be that this world is not real, but there is some kind of plot coercion? Luoya thought so, and a haze rose in his heart, but before he could think of a solution, the door had already opened, and a young lady with brown hair walked out of the carriage. At the same time, there were sounds of inhalation and clamor of praise nearby. That person is? It's the young lady of the Sorofia family. So beautiful. Xia Luot's peerless appearance and noble temperament almost defeated everyone's heart, and everyone nearby couldn't help but pay attention to her every move. However, the young lady didn't care about these gazes, and her eyes were only fixed in one direction. She's looking at us. Paul's surprised voice sounded, and the black-haired young man's mind was a little blank, but before Luoya could speak, the figure with brown hair had already appeared behind him after a gunshot. Dear. In the midst of the excited shout, Xia Luot suddenly hugged the young man from behind. This intimate action immediately caused the students present to exclaim. Luoya's brain that finally worked was once again stunned, and so was Paul, whose eyes were wide open. So, the carriage stopped because of me? The black-haired young man, who realized the truth, suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, and his body suddenly relaxed. Behind him, the young lady was rubbing his shoulder as if no one else was around. It's been 3 months, we finally meet again. Fortunately, I paid attention to the roadside. Xia Luot. Don't be like this, there are too many people nearby. Chapter 235. On the street, Paul Aikman, who heard Xia Luot's self-introduction, was dumbfounded. At the same time, all the girls nearby who were staring at Luoya were also dumbfounded. Xia Luot faintly glanced at the thieving cat trainees who had shrunk back. She was very satisfied with the effect of her declaration of sovereignty. If it was just a couple, some girls would not be afraid, but an engagement was completely different. This was because an engagement was inevitably the result of the communication between the two families. It represented the exchange of interests, and there was no room for involvement. The students of Cecily Women's College gritted their teeth and left. The girls of St. Wisdom College also gradually dispersed. Xia Luot looked at the situation and was slightly relieved. She finally had time to turn her head and look forward. It was only now that the brown-haired young lady really took a serious look at the appearance of the boy in front of her. Overall, he was above average, and his clothes were not bad. But for some reason, he gave off a feeling that his clothes did not match him. My name is Paul Aikman. Nice to meet you. Paul, who had just recovered from the shock brought by Xia Luot, replied. As soon as the words left his mouth, the atmosphere immediately stagnated. The brown-haired young lady stared at Paul with her eyes wide open. The latter also remembered the national enmity between the two families. Aikman. I'm sorry that. Xiaoluot. The Aikman family could be said to be the life and death enemy of the Sorofia family. Xiaoluot had already seen Paul, the illegitimate son who had caused a sensation in the Austin Empire half a year ago. But even if he was a stain on the Austin Empire's emperor, walking black material, Xiaoluot still did not like him, and even had her own prejudice against him. But as the saying goes, you have to look at the master before beating a dog. Paul was now with Luoya, and the two seemed to be talking before. So no matter how much Xiaoluot hated the Aikman family, she had to give face to her man. She must not make things unpleasant on the spot. Thinking of this, Xiaoluot met Luoya's gaze and nodded obediently. Mr. Aikman, you don't need to apologize. You are now Luoya's friend. Our two countries have already signed a peace treaty. Let bygones be bygones. Dear, it's great to be able to see you in advance. However, I'm in a bit of a rush. It seems that we can only meet at the academy later, the reddish-brown-haired girl said as she bowed to the two of them. Well then, excuse me. Due to the enmity between them and the Aikman, Xiaoluot politely left after greeting them, leaving only a wisp of fragrance in Luoya's nose. Looking at the departing horse-drawn carriage, Paul sighed and blamed himself. I must have made her unhappy. I'm sorry. Will it affect you? Don't worry, she's not that kind of person. Like I said before, your surname is not your fault. This cannot be changed. What kind of person you are is the most important. The black-haired boy still had a gentle smile on his face. He was not angry at Xiaoluot's departure at all. In fact, Luoya's heart was filled with gratitude and joy. It can be changed, it can really be changed. This world is real, and the power of the plot does not exist. Luoya clenched his fists in excitement. Recalling the hard work of the past 5 years, his heart was filled with emotions. On the other side, Paul Aikman was equally excited. Shia above, such a righteous person. Before coming to St. Freya Academy, Paul was fearful of this world-famous academy. After all, since he entered the upper class, almost everyone he came into contact with was his enemy. However, in this city, there was actually a student who did not discriminate against him. This gave him great encouragement. Perhaps life in the academy is not that bad? Paul held such hope in his heart, and walked in the direction of the academy with Luoya. The two people chatted casually, and quickly became familiar with each other. Men's friendship was often simple and direct. From knowing each other to becoming friends, there was no need for formal inquiries like in movies and TV series. Instead, it was hidden in the words of chatter, and the tacit understanding of looking at each other with a smile. There was no need to think like when facing a girl, it was pure and direct. In the process of getting along, Paul found that Luoya was a very knowledgeable person. Along the central road leading to St. Freya Academy, he could tell the history of many buildings along the way and tell the anecdotes of many famous people here. For Paul, who grew up in a remote mountain village in the Austin Empire, the boy's knowledge was beyond his reach. After discovering Luoya's brilliance, Paul's respect for him increased again. Taking this opportunity, Paul could not help but raise his doubts about St. Freya Academy. St. Freya Academy, although the name was repeatedly mentioned by the teachers, in fact, Paul was not clear about the specific situation. After all, no one had any expectations for him. The teachers only told him not to cause any trouble. Intelligence resources were still a luxury for Paul at this stage. Luoya was actually clearer than anyone about the situation of the boy who came with him, so he did not ask much. Instead, he chose to calmly tell the information he knew. St. Freya Academy was a school that, to a certain extent, transcended the city of academies of Leinster. Historically speaking, St. Freya Academy was established earlier than Leinster City, and from a high-level perspective, the Dean of St. Freya Academy, Antonio Cole, was the Speaker of the Parliament of the country of scholars. He was the real leader of this country. Chapter 236. The moment he stepped into the school gate, Luoya's body had an unexpected violent reaction. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as if he was struck by lightning. It was a violent resonance that came from the source substance inside his body, and even his entire bloodline. At this moment, the hustle and bustle of the people nearby seemed to be far away from him. Luoya seemed to be on a calm water surface. Little ripples spread under his feet, and on the other side in the distance, there was also a blurry figure standing opposite him. The ripples on the left and right collided, and the two people's eyes met at this moment. After a moment, the mysterious resonance ended. Luoya, who returned to reality, suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction he felt, but he only saw a solemn white building. Who is it? What was that just now? The black-haired boy stood stiffly at the school gate, his mind blank. The students passed by him one by one, but Luoya still couldn't recover. Crown actually produced a resonance reaction. How is this possible? The boy pondered this question with an incomprehensible expression on his face. The only reason was because of the resonance situation. Resonance between origin substances was something that had a negligible probability of happening. Most people would never encounter such a thing in their entire lives because resonance was actually a special reaction between two people's origin substances and bloodlines. Even in a situation where most extraordinaries would choose one of the three great origin substances, resonance was still extremely rare. However, Luoya's situation was different. Luoya was not a user of the three great source substances. His crown was an exclusive source substance extended from the Audiobook family's bloodline. In theory, in the case where he was the only son of the Audiobook family, Luoya could not have any resonance reaction in his life. Luoya? Luoya turned his head and looked to the side. He saw that Paul was blocked by a female student wearing a purple rose logo. The two of them looked at him together. Perhaps it was because Luoya's appearance was better, but the female student's expression softened a lot after she glanced at the school badge on his chest. She opened her mouth to ask about Luoya. This student, is he someone you know? I know him. He forgot to bring his school badge, so I can't let him in. I need someone to register and vouch for him or go back to get it. Are you willing to vouch for him? Was this even possible? Luoya couldn't help but be taken aback after hearing her words. She didn't expect her existence to cause such a consequence. In the beginning of the game, Paul, who was a lone ranger, didn't know anyone else. So when he announced his name, it caused a commotion. But now that Luoya was beside him, Paul naturally didn't want to cause trouble. Luoya, please help me with this. Looking at the boy in front of her who put his palms together and begged her, Luoya's expression became weird. But after thinking about it, she felt relieved. Indeed, if she looked at it from Paul's point of view without the player's point of view, being blocked on the first day of school was undoubtedly a disaster. As an illegitimate child, Paul didn't want to attract too much attention. Is this the butterfly effect? I didn't expect that even Lillian's side was accidentally destroyed. Luoya nodded in the boy's pleading eyes and followed the senior to write the registration form. When she saw Paul's surname, the female student's face changed obviously. But since the procedures were complete, she could only let the two of them go. By the way, senior, can I ask what the building in that direction is? Luoya pointed to a white building in the direction of her perception and asked, trying to find some clues for her strange feeling just now. However, after learning Paul's identity, the female student's attitude suddenly turned cold. I don't know. I see. The black-haired boy didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he stared in that direction and pondered. After hesitating for a moment, Luoya gave up the idea of rushing over now. The information obtained from the resonance at that moment was too little. It was almost useless in the school where the flow of people and the density of the population was very high. If she ran over now, Luoya wouldn't be able to distinguish which one was the resonator. Thinking of this, the boy could only shake his head and continue walking. Although Luoya was very puzzled by this situation, resonance was something that would happen sooner or later as long as one lived in the school. Now, it seemed that the entrance ceremony was more important. Luoya, thank you. After walking for a distance, Paul, who was clutching his chest with an expression of having escaped a disaster, said so sincerely. The black-haired boy didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 237. Lillian Aikman was an extremely complicated and contradictory girl, which originated from her family. Family was often a paradise for underage girls, but for Lillian, who was part of the royal family of the Austen Empire, family was the source of torture. Everyone knew about the current situation of the Austen Empire. It had been more than 10 years since Lillian's two brothers graduated from St. Freya Academy, but the two had not made any breakthroughs in their extraordinary powers. The fierce internal strife had been going on for a long time, and it had only intensified in recent years as Lillian grew up. There was no kinship in the royal family. This sentence could not be more appropriate to describe the royal family of the Austen Empire. Insidious schemes and vicious traps were the most gifts the girl received from her two blood relatives. As for her parents, Lillian was just a tool in their eyes. One was a tool for inheritance, and the other was a tool for maintaining their own prosperity and wealth. She was not replaced because she was the best. The ugliness of human nature was exposed to Lillian early on, causing the girl to give up on her family, which was just a facade. However, this was also the reason why Lillian was conflicted. Just like how the more you lack something, the more you yearn for it. Deep in Lillian Aikman's heart, she was extremely eager to have a real family, to love and care for each other, to have a deep, unchangeable, and inseparable relationship. This was the real family in Lillian's heart. In the past, this could only be an unachievable dream for the girl, but today, Lillian found that she had a chance. It was just that it was not a family by blood, but a family by blood. Blood and bloodline were two completely different concepts in Shia. Blood was brought to the child by the parents from birth, while bloodline was awakened by oneself. The two seemed similar, but in fact they were completely different. Take Luoya for example. Luoya's relative by blood was his father, Kadia. His relatives by blood were the previous generation of awakened, Roy Aikman, and the previous generation's Vincent Aikman. Luoya and Vincent's era were more than 800 years apart. From the perspective of bloodline, there was not much difference between them after dozens of generations of dilution. However, if Vincent met Luoya, he would definitely accept him because the two of them had the same bloodline, which meant that they must have come from the same source. This was an indelible objective fact. In Shia, this kind of unique bloodline connection was considered noble and unique to extraordinaires. Most of the time, it was only found in clans that possessed exclusive source substances. However, in rare cases, two people who were completely unrelated to each other could find each other due to their similar bloodlines. The method was resonance. In other words, it was very likely that there was a blood relative of Lillian in the academy after the resonance. Stroking her chest, the black-haired girl's heart was in turmoil, but she had no idea what to do. The source substance kingdom was the source substance that the Austen Empire's royal family possessed. However, in reality, it was not a bloodline-exclusive source substance. Instead, it was a product that most people could accept like mercy. However, the Austen Empire's royal family had monopolized it since ancient times, and as the ruling clan, they were very adaptable to kingdom. Because of this, even among the Aikman who used kingdom source substance, there was no commonality between awakened bloodlines. In other words, the reason Lillian was so powerful was because the bloodline she had awakened was more powerful than others, making it stand out among all the other bloodlines. In fact, Lillian had always felt that her bloodline might have an exclusive source substance, but as a core member of the Austen Empire, her identity as the imperial princess meant that she had to accept kingdom source substance. Otherwise, she would become a political target for others to use against her. From an objective point of view, kingdom was indeed one of Shia's best source substances. Although exclusive source substances were closer to one's bloodline, they might not be as powerful as kingdom. In fact, in the long history of the Austen Empire, there were precedents of the Austen Empire's royal family choosing exclusive source substances, but the results were not satisfactory. Lillian's bloodline and source substance did not come from the same source, so there were two possibilities for the resonance that had appeared in her body. Resonance. Judging from the direction of the school gate, it should be a new student. If we're talking about the source substance resonance, it should be that Paul Aikman. The young girl, who was talking to herself, frowned slightly. Indeed, in terms of bloodline, Paul Ackman was her brother and sister, and they both had kingdom, origin substance. It was most likely that the two of them would resonate with each other. However, Paul's identity made Lillian somewhat sensitive. An illegitimate child. In Lillian's eyes, who had been educated as a noble since she was young, this was a scandal of the Austen Empire's royal family. To be honest, Lillian did not want to have anything to do with this person. If the resonance was really him, Lillian would probably be very conflicted. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that it was not a source substance, but a more fundamental bloodline resonance. However, when she thought about this possibility, Lillian's eyes dimmed. Bloodline users were 1 in a million. Someone who had awakened the same extraordinary bloodline as Lillian, entered the same school in the same era, and happened to have a resonance. The probability of such a thing happening was probably so low that it could not be calculated. That's true. How could there be such a fate in this world? The black-haired girl who had calmed down sighed at her own extravagant hope. She slowly walked back to the table, and then her gaze sank slightly. At this moment, there was an exquisite letter in the middle of the table. The familiar double eagle symbol on the wax represented the Austen Empire's royal family. However, unlike the past, this letter was not written by someone else. It was written by the Austen Empire's emperor, Lucas. The meaning of the handwritten letter was self-evident. The contents of the letter were undoubtedly important. The black-haired girl naturally knew this. Therefore, after carefully opening the letter, she carefully read it. However, the contents of the letter left her rather confused. There were roughly 2 points in the letter. The first point was to ask Lillian not to let Paul Ackman, who had entered the school this year, have a hard time. Lillian had already guessed this request. After all, no matter what, Paul now carried the name of the Ackman family. However, the second point was completely unexpected to Lillian. Don't get close to the Audiobook family. That was the content of the second paragraph, and Lillian also sensed that this was the true purpose of Lucas' letter. The Audiobook family was a great noble family in the Saint Maester theocracy. As the Empress, Lillian had naturally heard of it. However, she was not allowed to get close to this family. What was the reason behind this obviously hostile order? The black-haired girl pondered for a long time, but still could not figure it out. She could only pick up the student file placed on the side and flip through it again. Luoya Audiobook. Looking at the name on the file, Lillian began to ponder in the empty room. Chapter 238. So many people of the same age. Walking on the vast lawn behind the school gate, Paul Ackman, who grew up in a mountain village, looked left and right. He was obviously not used to the current situation. Beside him, the black-haired youth was smiling helplessly. It had to be said that the current situation in St. Freya Academy was indeed somewhat nerve-wracking. Whether it was the scene or the people gathered, they were all too imposing. After entering the solemn school gate, Luoya and the others were faced with a vast lawn plaza. The area was at least several football fields in Luoya's previous life, and there was even an illusion that one could not see the end of it. Everywhere in the plaza were statues of famous teachers of St. Freya Academy in the past 1,000 years. Not to mention the past sages, the current Dean Antonio, the Vice Dean Campbell, the year directors of each year, and the famous Sage Mentor all had statues here. Sage Mentor was a unique title of St. Freya Academy. It meant that they had nurtured more than 100 outstanding graduates. 100 outstanding graduates did not seem like a lot, but it was actually very difficult because St. Freya Academy's model was that it was easy to enter, but difficult to leave. St. Freya Academy's entrance was actually not difficult, mainly because the tuition was expensive. However, it was very difficult to graduate from this school normally. In fact, every year there were many people who dropped out or repeated a year because of the lack of credits. The requirements for outstanding graduates were different from ordinary ones. They needed to be proficient in both literature and martial arts, and their credits were ranked in the top 100 of the school. Literature was needless to say. It was basically the same as the quality education in Luoya's previous life, but there were some aristocratic classes such as etiquette. In theory, if a graduate wanted to successfully graduate, They would need to pass at least 20 literature courses. As for martial arts, it was naturally extraordinary strength. There were more ways to obtain it, but it was roughly divided into two types. One was the school ranking battle. This method was simple and straightforward. To put it bluntly, it was a fighting ring. Both sides would fight, and whoever was better would go up. Anyway, they were all in the school, so they would definitely not die. However, the corresponding credits given were actually not that much. The reason was that this ranking system was very unfair, because there was no division of grades, but rather a ranking of the entire school. From this point of view, in a 4-year school, the higher the grade, the greater the advantage, and in fact, the top 100 were indeed 3rd and 4th year students. As for why it was designed this way, Luoya reckoned that a large part of the reason was to let the graduates freeload off credits. At the end of the day, the teachers of St. Freya Academy were not evil spirits. No one wanted to keep a large number of students who could not graduate, especially those who were mediocre in the aspect of supernatural powers, and could not go out to do missions. Even if they exchanged their academic credits for martial sciences at a 10-to-1 ratio, they would not be able to fill the hole. At this time, the ranking battle was useful. In this kind of situation where they could make up for the extra credits at the end of the term, the juniors were generally willing to give up a spot to their seniors. Of course, it was impossible to place too high up in the rankings, because there was a ranking list for the top 20. It would be broadcasted every month, and when there were real-time changes, it would also be broadcasted to the entire school. In fact, the top 20 ranking battles, as long as it was an open battle, would always be filled with spectators. It was considered a big event in the school. Without a doubt, the top 20 ranking battle was a great tool to increase one's reputation. It was also the goal of many youths in the school who had nowhere to vent their adolescent hormones. Do you want to be the school's idol? If you do, then go to the ranking battle. Of course, other than these dream chasers, there was another group of people who had to fight their way up, and that was the ring bearers. As the school's leaders, the ring bearers had great power, but they also needed to prove themselves with commensurate abilities. The ranking battle was the simplest and most straightforward way, and also the best way to deter those who intended to offend them. For example, the current ranking list, the top 3 were the 3 ring bearers. For the ring bearers, the ranking list was a form of publicity, and the corresponding credits were dispensable. The second way to obtain credits in martial arts was to go out and complete missions. St. Freya Academy was one of the places where the schools gathered, and there were all kinds of magical materials required. Old professors from the archaeology department led teams to explore ruins, secret realms, and the neighboring countries asked for help. All kinds of missions were endless, and the credits were generally high. But correspondingly, going out to do missions was different from the ranking battle in the school. There was a certain degree of danger. Although the teachers who led the teams would do their best to avoid accidents, there would be a relatively big accident every 10 years or so. From this point of view, going out to do missions did not seem to be very cost-effective. After all, it was just school, and there was no need to take risks for credits. But in fact, many people who frequently participated in missions were not for credits, but for the growth of their supernatural powers. As the saying went, actual combat was the fastest way to grow, and going out to do missions could be said to be a kind of actual combat with a certain degree of insurance. It could even be said that high-ranking extraordinaires could become one's personal bodyguard. For many nobles, this was a treatment that they could not enjoy except in school, and the knowledge learned from interacting with high-ranking extraordinaires, as well as the insights gained from watching them fight. These were priceless treasures that would be of great help to one's future development. For these people who thirsted for improvement, going out to do missions was really high risk, but high reward. There were actually quite a number of students who had such thoughts in the school, and there were also groups with similar thoughts, but the people who followed them were different, and that was the ring bearers. Among the many privileges of the ring bearers, one of them was that they could lead their own team to go out on missions. In this kind of situation where there was no help from the school, the credits for completing missions would be greatly increased or even doubled, and the rewards and reputation of the mission would all belong to the team member. Accumulating reputation was a very important thing for the ring-bearers, especially the heirs of the country. As for how important it was, the most representative and the most famous was the dragon-slaying incident of the Austen Empire a few hundred years ago. Of course, although it was called a dragon, it was not the kind that only existed in myths and were active in ancient times. Instead, it was a subdragon that did not even have wings, and was probably at the level of source rank 3. The incident should have happened more than 600 years ago, when the human world was not completely stable yet. From time to time, monsters would come out to stir up trouble. Among them, a subdragon at the border of the Austen Empire was a big trouble. At that time, the second-in-line heir of the Austen Empire was the ring-bearer of St. Freya's Academy. After some investigation, he joined forces with another ring-bearer of the Austen Empire to take on the dragon-slaying mission. And after a bloody battle, they succeeded in killing the subdragon. This dragon-slaying incident that did not have a mentor to lead the team shocked the whole Austen Empire at that time, and brought great fame and social resources to the prince. At that time, the members of the team were mostly descendants of the famous families of the Austen Empire. After this battle, they all persuaded their families to change their stance and support the second prince. Regardless of their previous relationship, the great honor of dragon slaying had united them as a whole, and in this case, it was definitely in the team's interest to have their former leader become the emperor. Was there a stronger relationship than having slain a dragon together when they were in the same school? Relying on the reputation of the people and the support of the team members' families, the prince successfully counterattacked in the later competition for the throne. This was the story of the famous dragon-slaying emperor of the Austen Empire, Phimas Ackman. He was an emperor for the rest of his life, and even until his death, he still enjoyed the benefits of slaying a dragon. Such a precedent not only attracted the envy of countless people, but also made the heirs of various countries vigilant. Therefore, it could be said that the heirs of various countries were eager to get the Ring of Roses. It was fine if they could not get it, but if they did, they would definitely lead a team on a mission. In this case, the team members who followed were not only for academic credits, but also to accumulate political resources for themselves. Under such circumstances, the number of people who went out on missions every year was still very high, and it was also the main way to provide academic credits. Of course, Luoya did not need to worry about this situation. After all, whether it was ranking battles or going out on missions, he could handle it with ease. However, Paul was not necessarily the same. Luoya was very clear about Paul's current situation. If he remembered correctly, this big brother should have just broken through to the source rank 5, and his strength should not even reach the new life average. However, his reputation as the illegitimate son of the Ackman family was that his ability to cause trouble was far superior to others. Looking at the few students approaching with unfriendly expressions, and the blonde figure in the distance, Luoya felt relieved. Fortunately, everything was within his expectations. The first act of the flag-raising operation was finally done, and it was time to start work. Chapter 239. The black-haired teenager looked at the students who were staring at Paul from the side, then looked up at the familiar blonde figure surrounded by the crowd in front of him. Finally, he looked around and sighed. At the same time, he was relieved. If Luoya remembered correctly, this should be the last scene of Paul and Ackerman's encounter. Who in the world wanted Paul to disappear the most? In the plot of Recorder's Eye, it might have been Luoya, but in reality, everything had changed. Luoya obviously had no such need, and the throne of the villain was naturally left to the other two. They were Paul's two good brothers. Since ancient times, internal strife was often the best explanation. The current situation of the Austen Empire was the best example. As an illegitimate child, Paul Ackerman's talent was mediocre, but even so, the two princes of the Austen Empire were still worried. In fact, they didn't want Paul to go to school at all, because going to school was equivalent to having the hope of progress. Paul's hope of being promoted to a high-level extraordinaire was despair for them. Therefore, when Paul entered the academy, he was a gift from the two good brothers. After more than 10 years of running the Austen Empire's aristocracy, how could the academy lack their lackeys? Luoya silently observed the two people running over with his cane. He didn't mean to make the first move. After all, no one could predict the future under normal circumstances. On the other hand, Luoya and Paul had only known each other for less than an hour. Now he just had to wait for the right time. The black-haired teenager thought so as he bid farewell to Paul, and walked a little further away, silently observing the front. Paul Ackerman looked at the nearby scenery, and his heart gradually calmed down from the initial panic. Slowly, there was a trace of joy. There were thousands of peers nearby. This was something Paul had never experienced before, so of course, it made him a little nervous. But after the nervousness, Paul also cheered up and realized that this was a new stage. This was not the Austin Empire, and the composition of the students was also from all over the world. Not many people here knew him, and the disgust and criticism of the aristocrats had disappeared. With the identity of a student, most people were relatively equal. As long as he worked hard on the new stage of the academy, his situation might really change. Paul strolled forward while thinking about the future, but after a few steps, he was suddenly stopped. "Hey, are you Paul?" May I know who you are?" "We're your seniors." "He's right, the third son of Count Rick." "I'm Carlo, the second son of Count Queezer. We're here for a simple reason. We want you to do something for us." "Do something?" On the lawn, two men, one tall and one short, blocked the young man's way. After hearing that both of them were nobles of the Austin Empire, Paul's face immediately turned gloomy. When he heard the purpose of the two men, the young man had a bad premonition. The facts proved that Paul's premonition was right. As if echoing him, the tall and thin Carlo said faintly, "It's nothing much. I just hope that you can quit school on your own." "Quit school?" "That's right. You know the current situation in the country. The throne is in the hands of the two princes. You, an illegitimate child, have no right to inherit it. Can't you just be a piece of trash? Don't cause trouble for yourself." Carlo looked down at Paul's cold face and said these obviously insulting words. There was no fear in his heart. For an illegitimate child with no right to inherit, even if he was of Aikman blood, there was nothing to be afraid of. No matter which of the two princes became the new emperor, Paul would be suppressed for life. The possibility of a comeback was almost zero. But if he could drive him out of the academy, Carlo, as the second son, might be able to get the appreciation of Paul's elder brother, Prince Aubrey, and might even inherit the title. Behind him, right as the third son of the Count, had the same idea. For a lifetime of glory and wealth, the two of them were willing to gamble. But unfortunately, their target was obviously unwilling to cooperate. "Are you kidding me? I refuse." The anger of being insulted burned in his heart. Paul, who just had hope in the academy, clenched his fists with anger. He didn't expect that after entering the academy, he would encounter the obstruction of his two brothers. This made him disheartened, and at the same time, he also broke out in rebellion. Seeing him like this, Carlo and the others' faces turned gloomy. "Brat, it seems that you don't know what's good for you. I think you want to. Wait, right, don't be anxious. Hee, it seems that our Prince Paul hasn't fully understood his position. Then let me explain it to him." Carlo stretched out his hand and stopped his burly companion. His face showed a mocking smile, and his eyes looked up and down at the young man. "Junior Paul, looking at you, don't tell me you still have some expectations for the academy life?" "What?" "You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.